Recording in progress.
We're only.
Well, sustainable architecture.
Recording. It's up to you.
Yeah, I know. I will be here.
So I guess let's do that. Do you need that to put the Zoom up? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, I'll be here. You can text me. It's awesome. Okay, cool. Thanks.
It's very easy process.
I know. Oh, cool. I did. I've done sprinkle. Yeah, great. And there's one at Indian Concrete. So that's like a block from my house. Although I have a backup because the last bus is due for 8. So as a principal, planning for our future, I would demonstrate sustainability.
Yeah. Then 100%.
Yeah. Good. Oh, I feel that. Yeah. It's all right.
So Guy, I think you are all set.
Okay. Great.
Start.
Microphones on. What are you on? Thanks. Just want to make sure we can get every word.
Every morsel.
Actually, you know what? I forgot. Let me go ahead and just bring Lynn over.
Oh, okay.
Lynn, we just promoted you as a panelist. If you can say something.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So Lynn is on. We're gonna project after the second applicant uses, and then we'll switch back and forth.
Okay.
Unless she has questions, and you're gonna wanna see her, right?
Yeah.
Okay, can you put this one up on screen? Thank you.
And just so everybody knows, we're in hybrid mode, so we do need to read the motion in full each time, even if the motion is 2 pages.
Oh, God. Okay, perfect.
All set?
We're good.
Okay. This is the Freeport Project Review Board meeting for Wednesday, September 21st, 2022. Prior to the meeting, we held a site walk at 22 Main Street. The first item on our agenda tonight is an information exchange, and I'll turn it over to Caroline.
Okay, so first up, we have staff approvals. These were in your digital packet, but I'll show you on screen as well. We had a staff approval for some signage at Good Fire. This was before you, maybe a year ago. They've been under construction in the former Conundrum Old World Gourmet Building on Route 1 South. They're going to be adding some halo lit signs on the building. The second staff approval was at the car wash on US Route 1 South. That was also before you within the past couple years. They, upside down plan, they made some changes to drainage. They had some issues, I guess, in the winter with drainage on the site in the car wash. So some drainage alterations and piping, no substantial changes to the site. And the third staff approval was just some sign face replacement for Irving on Mallet Drive. They've changed the Circle K logo. And that's all we have under staff approvals. Topics to be reviewed by the planning board. The planning board continues to review the uses of cannabis manufacturing and processing and cannabis cultivation. They have not yet finished up the site plan changes that got sent to the attorney, and there was a little bit of a delay there. They've been doing some zoning ordinance cleanup regarding language to non-conforming structures. They'll be having a special meeting to deal with non-conforming lots this week. And then they recently made recommendations to change the parking requirement. That went to council last night for a public hearing. And the parking requirement for multifamily housing in the village commercial one was reduced. It's not reflected in any of the applications before you. Figuring out final parking is usually a condition of approval, as it would be with anything else we do in the village. But the applicants would have the ability to meet parking either through shared parking, or they could meet it through restricted parking that says parking for so-and-so only, as with the current parking requirements, to encourage the use of shared parking, having it open for anyone to use. If you do shared, you have a lower requirement than if you do non-shared and send it only for your own property. So that's a snapshot of what the planning board's been up to. The Downtown Vision Task Force, did anyone go to the last meeting? I was out. Do you have an update from that?
I don't. Did you go?
Yeah, for other stuff, but I don't
Right.
recall
Okay.
that there was a
Yeah.
lot of change, except they narrowed down the list.
They've
of
been
things.
narrowing down the list to bring it to council to kind of help the council set priorities for implementation from the downtown vision. Some things are already happening, like looking for downtown housing, looking to change the parking, adding new events to the downtown. A lot of those things have happened this summer. There's gonna be a presentation to the council on October 11th, kind of like an open house workshop to get an update and for the community to hear about the different priorities that are coming out of the vision implementation group. Somewhat related, but really new, last night, I know a couple of you were in attendance, the town council had a special workshop on housing. There's been a lot of interest in housing in Freeport, the diversity and affordable housing specifically. So it was initial hour-long workshop before the council meeting, just to hear from some different groups and organizations in Freeport and what people are thinking and, you know, what they think we need. I think it's gonna be something we see coming up regularly, so they're all public workshops, anyone's welcome to attend, but in case anyone in the room's interested, those will be posted on the council website when they schedule another. That's all I have.
Okay, great, thanks. The next item on our agenda is the review of the minutes from the August meeting. Are there any comments on those minutes?
I have a comment somewhat. I was not at the meeting. I did want to just put on the record that I did listen to the meeting on the YouTube channel after the fact, but I wouldn't vote on it anyway, so.
Lynn, do you have any comments?
No, it looks good. Thank you.
If no comments, is there a motion to approve the minutes as read and written?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as read and written.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second that.
All right, thank you, Jason. We'll do a roll call vote. Berger,
Abstain?
thank you. Blanchard, yes. Donahue,
Yes.
Hamlin,
Yes?
Montleone,
Yes.
Reiki,
Abstain.
thank you. Yankee,
Yes.
right. Thank you. The next item on our agenda tonight are the reviews. The first one is the Freeport Station Apartments Multiple Family Dwelling, and I'll turn it over to Caroline.
Sure, so a couple of things before we get into the first one. You had two things in front of you tonight. You have an updated recording plat for the first housing project, the Freeport Station Apartments. As with any recording plan, there's always some notes that need to be adjusted at the last minute, where they have to put some conditions or just a little bit of minor cleanup. So they updated the map and lot. They added two corner property pins to be set, and they added a note regarding the access. Otherwise, there were no changes to the layout or the site. It was really just minor cleanup. And then second, you did get a letter of public comment. There's copies on the table over there from a resident from West Street who is providing written comment for Freeport Village Apartments. Before we dig into the first one, I just want to kind of review where we're at as a community. There was a lot of topics and a lot of discussion at the last meeting about a lot of things to do with housing. In the purview before the board, you have a very specific charge. You are to review applicants under the ordinances we have in place. So you need to review them under the current ordinances, the permitted use, the space and bulk standards in there. In this case, these would also trigger the design review ordinance and the subdivision ordinance. I think it's great to hear the relation to the vision. Our community's been so vested in that public process. I think there's definitely some overlap with some of our standards and some of the things we want, like we identified as part of the vision. We want to retain our charming New England character. We want to retain housing. Some of the things shown in the vision that you can't do would be approve a 6-story building. You know, that was an idea in the vision, but that's not the ordinance before you. So it's really important that we focus on the ordinances that we have in play today. We also heard a lot about affordable housing at the last meeting. Affordable housing is great if the developer wants to do it. That's great. You know, anytime we can increase our diversity of housing. We currently do not have an ordinance that requires a developer to provide any number of affordable housing units, so it's not something that you can consider as a factor. And then the other thing, you know, there's been, as we change, there's a lot of ideas of what people want to see on some of these lots. Again, you guys have to work with the ordinance and the permitted uses that are allowed, that any property owner has a right to apply for what's allowed under zoning. So any questions, or is that clear on the process and your rules?
Carolyn, do you have any reason to believe that an ordinance or proposed ordinance relating to affordable housing issues or some kind of the long-term vision issues will be before the the council within the next 6 months?
I don't know. We're heading into elections, so there's usually like a little bit of lull. I think there's going to continue to be talk about housing and affordable housing and what that means to Freeport and what kind of standards we want. Whether or not we'll have an ordinance before the council in 6 months, hate to predict. That's pretty quick. But I know there's a lot of desire to do that, and then there's desire and funding to clean up our design review ordinance. We have a whole lot of general zoning ordinance work to do that we really just are trying to do as fast as we can, but it's really hard to keep up.
In other words, there's no reason to believe that potential ordinance change is imminent,
For sure, 100%. There'll be changes to our ordinances.
but it's not.
With regard to affordable housing, you're asking?
Is it
With
with regard to affordable housing? Is there any reason to believe that a proposed ordinance change is imminent?
I don't think we're far enough along in the discussion. We had discussion one last night. They're trying to talk about what our community wants, what kind of housing, what level of affordable housing. You know, it's a big discussion. I think there's hope from a lot of community members that we'll have something, but we don't know what that's going to look like and what it's going to include. And these applicants are already in under current ordinances in this process.
I have a question. I shouldn't say anything about the housing issue because I'm on that side of things also, but I will add, because I could add it if I was sitting in the public, I suppose. There is a request for the council to create an actual specific committee to work on the ordinances, to try to get things done in a more timely and much faster time frame, but there's still no endpoint at the moment. So if that makes you feel better, it does, it should, but it hasn't been done yet. There's no committee and there's no set timeline yet, but hopefully. I have another question about about timeline. My understanding, which is possibly wrong, is that when we get an application, it has to be applied to the existing ordinances that are there at the time of the application. So I believe I've heard, even on the sidewalk, that if there was a change, for instance, in the parking requirements last night, that an existing application could still change to those we could ask them, or they could require the change to that ordinance before they get their actual final approval, is that?
No, they would have to meet for parking, the standard we have in place. Parking is fluid, it changes all the time, depending on tenants, the build-out, we calculate it once they're approved, so they would meet whatever standards in place when they go to build it.
Okay, and that's always part of the motions that we do in approval?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, when the planning board changed the parking, residential, we're going on tangents, which we gotta get back on track, but like most of the commercial stuff you do is square footage based upon interior layout, so that's standard, but no, they would have to meet whatever's in place today for that.
Okay.
Okay, you ready to dive into the
Yeah, let's do it.
project? Okay, so Freeport Station Apartments, they've been before you for a concept, and at the last meeting, you had reviewed the preliminary plan, and you had a public hearing. This project requires site plan review, subdivision review, and design review, all of which you conduct at the same time. They had already submitted capacity letters. The lighting plan has tweaked a little bit. They had to change fixtures so they could comply with the requirements of the ordinance. Access and circulation remains unchanged. They don't have a road, but they have access over an abutting property, so they are trying to finalize an agreement on that. Going back in deed research, there were some rights, but they didn't meet today's clear legal standards, so that is something that's pending, and that is noted on the plan as a condition of approval. They can't do any site work until we get the final legal documents, and they're reviewed by the town attorney. Parking, they're gonna have 24 spaces on site. If they need to get parking off-site, they could do that through the shared parking pool. Again, that would be calculated at the requirement at that point in time. Stormwater management, there really hasn't been any change. They made some minor tweaks to the building, which I'll let the applicant go into. And really, there's nothing outstanding from a staff perspective with this project.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn it.
Can I ask a quick question
Sure.
before we go? Just technically, because you mentioned they gave in a revised sheet, that would be the signed sheet for the site plans. I noticed that it says on this plan, the one we had, and now the same copy, that it says condominium units, and I know they said in their documents rental, so I believe this isn't going to be an accurate plan either, whatever it is they changed. I think it still needs to have another change on it.
Is it on the sorry, the?
It's on the, I mean, it's on the one you just gave us, it's
Yeah,
on
in the middle of the building.
C-102A.
Yeah, if the board could, if the board wants to take action, they could take action with a note that get cleaned up, and then you could sign the plans at the next meeting.
Okay, but it
I mean,
is rental.
Regardless, to this board, we don't distinguish between apartments and condos. To us, they're all multifamily.
Except if they were a condo, they'd have to have the required documents in
Yes.
front of our approval,
Yep.
so.
Okay, thanks. I'll turn it over to the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. David Latulip, representing JHR Development as a consultant. Sorry for that typo. Everyone missed it during that, so we'll clean that up. It's easy, as no desires to do condos. That hasn't changed. I'll be brief because the board is very good last time, gave us 3 or 4 things to work on. In particular, we all felt like the 3 entrances that we added on the side of Depot Street they're private entrances and look public, so we've added in some railings, and I really liked how we followed up more like you have at the Bartow Library, where the granite comes down and flares, so it had a nice feel to it, and trying to pick up some of those features. We added a couple layers of brick above the first floor to break that up and give a nicer feel. What else do we do? And on the retaining wall, we picked some local features. One that came to mind, we should have put it in the pictures, is as you come in off of the highway, that rock wall that you see that Ella Bean owns, that they always have different signs, but that's what we showed in the picture. So it's more of a residential flat rock that we've used in other projects, and it'll look really good. So that's basically what we've done. Everything else has gone through the extensive staff review, and we meet all their criterias, and here to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn it over to the board. If anybody has any questions.
have a question about
Sure.
parking. Can you or Caroline explain to me what, I know you don't have enough parking spaces on site. Last night,
Yes.
and then there was a change in the ordinance last night.
There was a change last night. So the change last night would have a couple different things. There's a standard if you want to use shared parking. So if they want to have all of their parking on-site and off-site not signed for their specific use only, they would have to provide 0.75 parking spaces per unit. If they want to say, for Freeport Station apartments only, we would calculate that parking at 1. If they want to meet some on-site and have it be restricted, we would calculate a combination of the shared and not shared to figure out what the requirement is going to be. So the highest they would need there of 1 per unit would be 67 spaces.
And LL Bean has excess parking throughout the town based on the latest revisions. So the developer will either enter an agreement with LL Bean, they've already had the makings of an agreement, or there's also talking to the village station to do some of the parking garage, which especially that second floor is pretty vacant.
That's been your plan all along,
Yeah,
so what happened
and
last night?
he wants to make sure he has plenty of parking so his residents, I mean, it's a renting feature. I mean, he doesn't want to be underparked, so.
I will clarify, they would have to show us before they can get their permits or open, I can't remember exactly how it's worded, that they meet the parking. They also have the option, they could buy a parking lot or they could own parking. If they want to lease parking, they can't just, go to someone and lease it. Whoever has the extra spaces has to sign an agreement with the town, put the spaces in the leased parking pool, and they have to go through the lease parking system, just like everybody else, so we
Go ahead,
can
Sal.
make sure that that requirement's met.
Great.
Was the ordinance adopted last night, effective immediately?
Thanks. Go ahead.
I have a question about the brick
Yep.
material. For some reason, I don't have the A301 drawing in the package of information in front of me, but I've seen it on Todd's screen over here.
Okay.
It does appear to be an image of the brick. But could you describe what it is? I think it's going to be important that it,
It's like a standard Moran red brick.
so it's a water-struck brick, traditional.
Yeah, traditional that you would see here in Maine, so. I think they had provided the details, if not,
Okay.
and that's what they're planning on, sourcing it locally and making it what we see every day in the mill towns.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Then the other question is, I know there are street trees shown in the renderings, they're not shown on the landscape plan. I know that's outside of your property line. I do think it's important that street trees be accommodated. Caroline, I have no idea what the mechanism for that would be, but.
So they do show some improvements in the public right-of-way. Anything shown in the public right-of-way is beyond the purview of the project review board and would require review and approval from the town council.
But it is a desire of the applicant to do that streetscaping. And, I mean, if you look at some of the trees on there, they're pretty rough shape, so those need to be replaced and upgraded. And we're gonna we'll work with the local arborist to make sure they're non-invasive and do well in town.
Jason, I think, is this what you were looking for, A303,
301.
301?
So, to further understand the tree part of that, based on the action of this meeting today, then the planning department would take it up with the town council based on our recommendation to have the street
The way it
tree?
was explained to us is, it's the town land, we need permission from the town council to go to plant a tree on the town property.
Okay, so
It's our desire to do that, because I think it makes a big difference on there, and we've kept that grass area for that, and we plan on improving all the sidewalks and doing that as well. So it's, even if it's not in order of conditions, it's something that we're gonna, as long as we can get permission from the town council, which I don't see them saying no, I don't see that as an issue.
We don't have a tree right now, we don't anyways have a requirement for street trees or street trees off-site.
Would it just, I don't know if we need to do this, but so it doesn't fall through the cracks, would it be helpful or prudent for this board to Also make a formal recommendation to the town council that should this project continue forward, that the town council consider.
You know, I think you
I'm
can
just,
say that.
because just so we don't lose it.
Public right-of-way is beyond the purview of the project review board. It really comes under complete streets and the council. So I think you
But can we,
share your thoughts, but
Is that a public hearing at the council then, where we could
I
comment?
I have circulated it internally to see if some of this does require council approval, or if it could just be done with a highway opening or road opening permit for the work in the right-of-way. I have yet to had a resolution to that. It's here as a condition as needs to be resolved.
but if we don't have an active, something that goes before them, then it may never happen. They may
Yeah.
never bring it up for consideration or as a discussion point.
There's a little bit of an unknown. We do have a tree committee who's working on some possible rules that in the future would come into play. Again, I think you could put it out there, and if ultimately they have to go to the council and the council, they ask for trees and the council knows you support it, that's a public input, but the process is a little bit unknown at this time. We have to, again, finalize depending on the scope of work, but it is beyond you and we don't have a requirement. I know it's not the good
No,
answer.
I
It's not the
understand
answer
it's
you
not a
guys want.
requirement. I guess,
but-
can we make it an active, put it as an active item that somebody has to pick up on the other end, or that it's a formal item that they
I'm
need to be
concerned
aware
for
of?
you guys to start requiring street trees off property.
Not requiring, but asking them to consider.
I guess, I'm not concerned if you guys want to share your thoughts on street trees, like, hey, if the applicant comes forward and wants street trees, we think it's a great idea, we support it. I'm concerned with you saying, hey, council, we think you should put street trees here, because I feel like that's really under other committees.
In other words, we can recommend, but we can't control what anyone does with that recommendation.
Right, I feel like that's beyond your purview. We have we have tree task force, we have town council, and we have the complete streets committee that will all deal with things on public property.
But this application will never go to them. There's no mechanism.
It may have to go to council. We're waiting to get the final confirmation depending on the work. But we don't typically send something and say, we want this.
So
But
who
Tom,
does initiate?
we're
Is it the
gonna,
applicant that
we're gonna
initiates?
request to
Yeah.
place trees, and we don't know if it's gonna be approved by DPW or the council, but we're
Yeah.
gonna make the request, so.
That's why I think,
No,
we-
no, that-
I mean,
appreciate
it's,
that, yeah.
it's a beautiful building, so it needs trees.
Yeah.
It really does need trees.
Yes.
if you want to acknowledge support of that request via
Yep.
a motion, I think that's fine, but putting a condition that they initiate that, I think.
Oh,
would
no,
be
it wasn't a condition. It would have been separate. Okay. We can talk about how we do close loops later.
Okay, great. Sure, the tree task force is looking
Yeah.
for members.
Item 5 tonight, right, we'll talk about that.
Linda?
Any other questions? I know for previous meetings, we went, by site review, subdivision, design review. I thought for this one, we didn't necessarily need to do that. We've seen and discussed a lot of this already. Any other thoughts from folks in the room? How about online? Does Lynn have any comments or questions?
I do.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yep.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to compliment the design people for their response to our comments at the last meeting. The jut outs and the stairways, I think, make the building, it breaks it up nicely and makes it look less like one big, long building. So I just think it's nicely done.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, are there any members of the public that wish to speak on this application? If so, please go to the podium. Okay, seeing none, unless there are any other questions or comments from the board, I will entertain a motion.
Is anybody online?
Oh, sorry, yes, is there anyone online, Caroline? Thank you.
If anyone online wishes to speak, you can raise your virtual hand. There are no hands raised. if somebody was gonna make a motion, I just wanna correct one thing. There was a TBD here in the plan date. So the date on the subdivision recording plan is 09/2022. Linda made the note that, it should be revised to remove reference to condominium.
Where's that?
Condominium building. You would wanna, whoever makes a motion would wanna probably add that in.
Where would that be added?
I think you could do subdivision reporting plan dated September 2022 to be revised to remove the reference to condominium building.
I'll make a motion.
You'll do it?
You want one? I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Ford.
Move as follows. Be it ordered that the Freeport Project Review Board approve the printed findings of fact, design review certificate, site plan, and final subdivision plan for 10 Depot Street LLC for the proposed Freeport Station Apartments, tax assessor map 11, lots 127 and 128, for the 67-unit multifamily residential subdivision, subdivision plan dated September 2022, revised to remove reference to condominium building, to be built substantially as proposed, finding that it meets the standards of the Freeport Design Review Ordinance, Freeport Zoning Ordinance, the Freeport Subdivision Ordinance, and the following conditions of approval. 1, this approval incorporates by reference all supporting plans that amend the previously approved plans submitted by the applicant and their representatives at Project Review Board meetings and hearings on the subject application to the extent they're not in conflict with other stated conditions. 2, prior to any site work, including but not limited to clearing of the site and prior to issuance of any building permits, the applicant will do the following. A, enter a maintenance agreement for stormwater management system with the town of Freeport to be recorded in the Cumberland County Registry of Deeds, with yearly stormwater reporting to the town of Freeport being required. B, establish a performance guarantee in the amount to cover the cost of all site work associated with the project in the amount to be decided in the form acceptable to the town attorney. The performance guarantee in accordance with Article 12-9 of the Freeport Subdivision Ordinance shall cover the cost of all site work, including road, erosion control, stormwater management, landscaping, and demarcation of property lines, etc., along with a performance guarantee and non-refundable administrative fee at the rate established by the Freeport Town Council be paid. C, establish an inspection account in the amount to be determined by the town engineer to cover the cost of site for inspection of site improvements by the town engineer. D, the developer will have pre-construction meeting with the town engineer. E, the applicant will submit a final copy of the updated legal documents, easement, and maintenance agreement pertaining to vehicular access to the access way from Depot Street to the property to be reviewed and approved by the town attorney. 3, pay pavement maintenance impact fee at the time a building permit is applied for and based on the size of the structure and the current impact fee effective at such time. 4, final signed copy of the recording plan should be recorded in the Cumberland County Registry of Deeds within 90 days of the date upon which this plan is signed. Otherwise, the plan should become null and void. 5, the applicant shall provide town planner with a letter of a registered land engineer stating that monumentation shown on the plan has been installed. 6, the applicant shall provide the town with a digital file in the form compatible with the assessor's records containing the information shown on the recording plan. And finally, no, shoot.
Oh, you got another page? Another page. Quiet.
The board approves the use of color called Monterey taupe, which will be factory applied finish to the hardy board siding. 8, prior to the building permit being issued, the applicant demonstrate the applicable off-site parking requirement per section 515 of this Freeport zoning ordinance so the project can be met based on the standards in place at such time. 9, prior to construction, the applicant obtained applicable building permits from the Freeport Department of Public Works. 10, any proposed improvements in the public right-of-way are beyond the purview of the Project Review Board, and review and approval from the Town Council may be required. And finally, any site improvements such as landscaping shall be shown in the boundaries of the subject property, will need to be agreed to by the abutting property owner, and may require an amendment to the site plan for the abutting property. If such changes are not agreed to by the abutting property owner, the applicant may need to return to the board to modify the landscaping plan for this project.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second that.
All right, thank you, Jason. Roll call vote. Berger?
Yes?
Blanchard, yes. Donahue?
Yes.
Hamlin,
Oh, sorry, we had to unmute you. We were having interference. Hold on. Can you unmute?
Yes.
okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Monteleone,
Yes.
Reiki,
Yes.
Yankee.
Yes.
All right, thank you, unanimous. Thank you so much. The next application before us tonight is the Freeport Village Apartments multiple family dwelling. And once again, I'll turn it over to Caroline.
Sure, so this application was before you in July with conceptual plans. There was a lot of feedback from the board and public, and the applicant took that feedback and made some revisions to the plans. I think that revisions were fairly significant. They before had one large building on the site. They've now broken it into two smaller buildings. They have actually increased the number of units to 30, even though they have decreased the overall square footage of the building. As we already talked about, we don't really get into a lot of detail about condominiums versus apartments, but their intent with the new design is that these would be apartments. They do incorporate some new site features such as walkways, a green space on the corner. Their intent is to meet the parking on site. They could do that based upon the changes that the council made to the ordinance last night. They will be connected to public utilities. Vehicular access is still, as we talked about at the last meeting, from West Street. Again, new pedestrian connections. There's been a lot of questions about the stone wall on that property. They do intend to reuse it, repair, and retain it as much as possible. I'll let the applicant go into the details on the building design, but as far as process, this is subdivision, this is conceptual. The only thing, if you wanted to take action tonight, the only thing you'd actually be acting on would be the conceptual subdivision. Is the building in the right space for the layout of the site? Again, they don't have any open space requirement. There was a small pocket of wetlands. So there is a proposed motion here for you if you are comfortable taking action on the conceptual process. No formal action is needed on the design review or site plan component, but again, in all fairness to the applicant, any feedback the board can provide at this process would be helpful. Happy to answer questions, or the applicant's team can walk you through the changes to the site and building.
Great. Thank you, Caroline. I'll turn it over to the applicant.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Paul Peck. I'm with LWS Development. And as I said, our first meeting a couple months ago, I'm from North Yarmouth. I'm a real estate developer, and I'm an attorney also. And so I've been through these processes before. And I'm pretty excited to be here in Freeport. I love Freeport. It's a great town. My wife and I and kids have spent a lot of time here as they were growing up, and my wife and I still come here for shopping and restaurants and art and entertainment. And so it's a wonderful community. I became interested in doing housing in Freeport when I started hearing about the vision plan and reviewing the vision plan. It's a great document. I understand that they're not always easy to implement. They're costly and it's going to take time, but what a great vision that the town came up with through the principal group on the vision plan. And you know, the vision plan talked about bringing 1,500 units of housing to the village. A significant number. I mean, between our project and the project that was just approved, that's 93 units. So there's a long way to go, but you got to start somewhere, I suppose. And you know, we're at the beginning of that process. The site I really like. There aren't a lot of sites for housing. When you walk around and look at it, I know there's a lot of parking lots, but those are in use and there's still parking requirements. And there's just not a ton of sites. There certainly aren't a lot of sites on Main Street. And I'm excited for the residents to be on Main Street and within walking distance. There's so much that Freeport has to offer with just the arts and the entertainment and the train station and the bus stops right here at the town hall. I think it's a great site. It will be really great for the residents who end up living here. You know, at the first hearing, it didn't go well, I guess is a fair characterization. There were many comments on scale and design, and it took me a while to figure it out. We all rewatched the hearing. I watched it several times. I know our design team watched it at least once, and it was clear that that our design didn't meet the board's expectations of the design review criteria, and that's fair, and it's fine, and it's your prerogative. And I think what we were trying to do before is we were trying to introduce more of a modern element to the town, and that didn't go over well. So we really completely changed direction. We changed direction in the sense of, and I don't know if you want to show the site plan. This is the original site plan, and we were occupying almost all the frontage on Main Street and a significant amount of the frontage on West Street and on the town hall side. So that was, it was big in scale, and there was a lot of comment about the scale didn't really fit in with the character of the town. The architecture didn't fit in with the character of the town. So we spent a lot of time looking at the design criteria again, and basically what it boils down to, it has to be visually compatible with the nearby buildings, the squares, and the places in the nearby A and B buildings. So that's sort of how we framed it. There's certainly criteria, there's 9 criteria that relate to that. But the overall design direction is make it visually compatible with your town and the squares and places in town. And so if you go to our next slide, you'll see what we've done is we have broken broken the buildings into two smaller buildings. We're occupying about 23% less square feet on the ground. We've been able to then, therefore, add a lot of green space to the site, both on the West Street side, on the town hall side, some, and then in the middle of the building. So the buildings are broken up, which is very common in this town. There's lots of smaller buildings relatively close together, and it fits more in line with the town and how the buildings look. So what we've done is we have 2 buildings. Each building's broken into 2 different blocks, so it's less scale there also. Still 3 stories. We have about 23% less square footage building footprint. We're occupying 51% of our Main Street frontage. This is approximate, and 42% of our West Street frontage. What this design also allowed us to do is allowed us to push the buildings not as far down West Street or on the town hall side. So our buildings look with the grade more like a 3-story. As we were coming down West Street, we had a large, almost like a daylight basement, which made the building look and read like a 4-story building, and there were some public comments to that effect. And we took them seriously, as we took all your comments seriously, and we moved the building up. They're about 46 by 98, I think each building is. And so that's what we did. There's less building, there's less massing, less scale, and it fits in better. On the West Street side, there's a lot of comment about people entering town from the south going north on Main Street. You're going to see this building, and what we've done is we've pushed the building over on West Street, so there's more green space. We've proposed a small park on the corner that we will reuse our stone walls. We can really make a nice landscaped park there with a couple benches, and we think it would be a nice focal point as you enter town with some landscaping, and also it could really tie in to the proposed on the vision plan, the public square across the street on the Public Works property. There already is a small park there right now, but the proposal in the vision plan is for a much bigger public space. Either way, this would be a public space. We would, if the town would allow it, we'd certainly deed rights to the public to have access to this small park, and anybody could use it. So we also added an entry to the building on this side, which we didn't really need because in the interior courtyard, there's main entries for mostly the second and third floor units. But we thought we needed to break up the facade even more on the West Street side because it is such a focal point. So we made a nice entrance with a nice walkway up to the entrance. Although, again, we didn't need it, but we did it because we thought it was a good focal point and broke up the facade and was just nice. We've also, and we did the site walk today, so the board knows, but the public doesn't. We also are proposing to retain almost all, if not all, of the exposed ledge on site on the West Street elevation. We think we can pin our foundations to what's there, and if we need to do anything, we would scrape some off, but we think we may not have to do anything. We certainly won't be blasting. And so that's another focal point. It's a very beautiful piece of ledge there. So that's what we've done there. I guess we can look at the next slide. So this is just something that our design team put together. Our buildings are here and here, and it's interesting because I mean that's what we pay them for, to really think about these big issues. But looking at it with the surrounding buildings, it really fits in with what's happening around us. So across the street, you see buildings fairly close together with green space in between them. And that's what we have. And as you move down the street, the same thing repeats. And so we're excited about this building fitting in with the character and fabric of other buildings, of other prominent buildings in town, and not overwhelming the site. So that's sort of cool. I thought that was really interesting. So we can take a look at the next slide, please. So this is our design, and I know I mentioned at our site walk, but Ford, Mr. Reike, who's on the board, mentioned at the last meeting that, we want to see, or he wanted to see, the old-fashioned sort of feel of the Freeport Village within our design, and that's, and that's basically what the design criteria says too. How our building fits in with the A and B buildings in our neighborhood. In our immediate vicinity. And what we did is we came up with a traditional design, which incorporates colonial features and federal features, which Freeport has mostly. Materials are fiber cement, but they read like clapboard sidings, which is predominant in town. 3 stories. There's historically several buildings in downtown with 3 stories. For housing, not a lot of fenestration, but with bay windows. And we met with your design, the principal group. We met with Russ Preston, who helped with your vision plan, and we had some input from him, which was very helpful. And he really liked the direction we were going, but he suggested we really amp up the bay windows, which we did. And so the bay windows are really he said the bay windows were everything. And so we made them everything, and we really made them, they're sort of old looking, but it's obviously a newer building. And so we're excited about design, we're excited about having the green space in between the buildings. It creates like a garden style, a suburban urban garden style apartment building or complex community. And the garden-style apartments date back to the late 1800s in England. I did some research on them, and to create community and have the green space, community within the actual apartments, but also with the community at large. And I think we're doing that pretty well. I really like it. The courtyard in the middle. I think it's cool, and I really like it. So. I'll let the architectural team talk about, how this building meets the criteria, how it takes aspects from the surrounding A and B buildings and incorporates those into our building. But I did want to talk about what we've done here. We have 4 entrances on the main floor, the first floor, to people's units. So they will activate the street, bring the community to the residents and the residents to the community. We also have access points for the first floor residents in the courtyard also. The second and floor access internally to the second and floor units. The first floor units are all 1-bedrooms. They're all accessible. So there'll be 14 accessible 1-bedroom apartments on the first floor, which I really like. I think that's great. And I hope, I've built other apartments, and I've always hoped that the ADA units and the accessible units are occupied by people who need it. And it doesn't always happen, but it sometimes does. And in a recent project, we had an ADA unit occupied by someone who needed it, and it was great. It was great. And so we have 14 units that are accessible, very, very accessible, and I'm excited about that. And then we have 16, basically 2 bedrooms on the second and third floor. What else? You can see, yep, so this is our West Street in our rear elevation. On the West Street elevation, and if you could go back once, I just want to talk about the West Street a little more. On the top, you can see the West Street, the entrance, and the pocket park in the corner. You can move to the next entrance. And I'm pretty much done. You know, we see what we have here is the back and the West Street entrance. We're going to have the great feature of the retained ledge. We're going to plant some trees. We're going to have the main entrance. We're going to have the pocket park. In the rear, my plan is, because we will have some grade change, and there'll be some exposed foundation and walls, and I would like to vegetate those with, I've done it before in other projects with an ivy-type creeping vine. So that'll be pretty cool to have that grow up. It's amazing what those things do. You know, you don't really want those in your garden a lot because they grow everywhere, but you want them on walls, and it'll be a nice feature. We also have porches on the second and third floor for the residents, which will be nice for them. And I think it reads nice too. It's pretty, and we have the parking below. That's pretty much all I have. And I'd like Eric, our civil engineer, to talk a little bit about the civil engineering issues. Thank you.
Thank you. So Eric Doobie with Trillium Engineering, civil structural engineer. And essentially, I mean, we just took a tour of the existing site so we can tell where the existing ledge is, the existing drainage ditch, you know, a couple of the trees and the stone wall. We can go right to the site plan on that if you'd like to, on that, Josh. So I know that Paul, you know, he talked a lot about the site, specifically the pocket park, you know, the common courtyard that's in between. So I think we've kind of covered a lot of that. Obviously, we're going to slope. I think we could all see that from the site walk. We're going to slope essentially from Town Hall all the way back down to West Street. That's a natural grade, and we're going to be able to utilize that with our stormwater. We've got that underneath, basically in that hole that's out there, the existing hole. We're going to be able to utilize that for our stormwater, essentially containment, and be able to treat that also. We've got a couple catch basins down near our proposed entrance. As discussed, we have a one-way entrance. It's about 18 feet wide that continues from there and then connects to basically the shared town exit, or at least our egress on that. We have our handicap parking essentially at the top left. That's where we're essentially the flattest and be able to utilize a ramp to be able to get up to the courtyard. And then parking on the right, left, and then we'll infill with some trees, some landscaping, and do some associated landscaping and buffering down on the edge of West Street. We have essentially all of our utilities. So we have electric, which is that main pole adjacent to our entrance, and water and sewer, all access from West Street. That way we don't have to basically access that from Main Street, which is going to be, during construction, it's just a real pain, so it'll be easier. Still going to be a pain on West Street, but it'll be a little bit easier for us to be able to access those utilities. So, so in essence, I think that's a civil engineering side of things and how we're going to treat some of that stuff. And I'll turn it over to Patrick and Josh to talk about the real interesting stuff.
Hi everyone, I'm Patrick Booth. I'm the director of the commercial studio for the architect Caleb Johnson Studio. I'm here with Josh also from our office, and so we just put together a series of slides that that helped demonstrate some of the background before our design work that we did when we redesigned the building after hearing the feedback from the board. First, the slide just talks specifically about the ordinance, and so we really took it to heart, especially the overarching sentiment on that second line to make sure that all new buildings are designed and built in a manner compatible with the character of the district in terms of scale and visual effect. And so we spent a lot, it's been about 5 weeks or so since we were here, or it's been a while, since 2 months here, since we've been here last. And so that took some time for us to kind of go back to the drawing board quite literally and see how, as Paul mentioned, how it might work essentially as apartments, smaller footprint for that to really address that scale feature. Then also the visual effect portion of it. And so on the next series of slides, you'll see how we came about with that. The next one, Josh, shows the first thing about scale. You kind of think of the whole surrounding neighborhood in at a higher level and see how we look around the surrounding properties. The series of slides left is what you've seen before, figure ground diagram. Really just shows the size of the footprints of the buildings in the general area. And you can kind of tell that it would be hard to pick out our building distinct from the others, and that's kind of the goal from that exercise. You can kind of understand how before and with this study that the building previously would have looked potentially out of place with the rest of the footprints. The second slide talks about height. The buildings around vary between 1 and 3 stories. Most of them are 2 stories, but a lot are also 2.5 stories. With a scattering of 3-story buildings as well. That's the color differential in the diagram. Then on the slide on the farthest right, it talks about the catalog of buildings in the surrounding area, whether or not they're A buildings, B buildings, C buildings, based on the designation of the neighborhood. And so there's a little number keyed there. And so in the next series of slides, we start really analyzing, doing walks of those of the sidewalk and Main Street and the buildings along those, and kind of really start studying the features of those. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. So yeah, so really the next 5 slides just show really just digesting some of the character defining features of the buildings. As Paul mentioned, they're predominantly federal and colonial style neoclassical buildings, and so that is certainly what characterizes the visual effect of the neighborhood. And so to be compatible with that, we certainly recognize that the building does indeed need to invoke some of those same stylings, and the flavor of those buildings will present themselves. So there's a consistency of some certain things we found that we felt was influential to our design. We saw a lot of nice bays with pitched roofs. Collaborative siding was very predominant, the wide corner boards. There was an instance of the entries have a larger void where they have a bit of a prominence to them versus the rest of the building facades that we wanted to incorporate. Other elements here on the next slide shows a lot of buildings on the upper left corner have site walls. So with our property having that existing beautiful stone material, a very important feature to keep that, but also used in a way to help define public space versus semi-public space, because between the building and the sidewalk is great opportunity for small patios for people's entries, for example. And that's... Well, thank you. And so I won't go in ad nauseum all the elements here that we have shown on the board, but really just showing basically showing our work to get to the point where we were about studying these buildings. Let's see, what else might be specific about this? Heavy cornice on the bottom right corner building. Next slide, Josh. So these are some of the buildings down at Depot Street. We like the more bay windows, which are interesting with the pitched roof. This one also has a nice shadow line that's cast at the second floor, and it changes some materiality between the second floor and the first floor. And so we'll go to the next slide. And these are direct across the street. They're not as helpful in terms of contextual information, but there's still some things we can pull from it. And lastly, the question might be about, well, it's a flat roof. Is that something that's visually compatible? And I would certainly say yes, it would be for a 3-story building of an apartment style. You can see in the bottom right corner is how if a 3-story building was built in Freeport, as that is shown. I'm not sure the use of those buildings, but they very well could have been apartments, in that they're most traditionally built as a flat roof. And the existing flat roofs here on the, further in the downtown core, closer to the Patagonia building and Yellow Bean. Go ahead, next slide. Yeah, and so this is just an architectural version of the same site plan you've seen before. we can skip through that. This is just a quick slide to show that we're not asking for any sort of particular waivers for the project. It meets all the site setbacks. It's well under 13 feet less than the max height limitation, and also well under the impervious percentages. So I think part of it was that we maybe put too much emphasis on the zoning information, less on that very critical term about visual compatible with the scale part of the design ordinance. And so those have to work together. And so that's where this design came about, where those working together to have something that doesn't build the max out, because it actually needs to also reflect the scale of the building appropriately for the neighborhood. And so, yeah, these are the same slides you see before. I won't go into too much detail about that. I would like to think that a lot of the details of what we presented itself are apparent. But some of the things that are interesting to us is, of course, the bay windows. We think that's a way to help break down the scale, especially directly on Main Street. It gives some very nice visual interest as you're coming into town to see that corner with the two bay windows, and in the foreground having some nice trees, and that little pocket park we think is a nice way to enter into the town as you're coming that way. And jump to the next slide. I really like this slide. It really shows the perspective of that green space between the two buildings. There were some comments before about, like, where are the trees? It's like, well, there wasn't much private property left to build trees. In this move, by having a courtyard, we actually do develop some private property where we can have green space on it, and trees and stuff to add shade and more that character finding old school elm tree character that you might see in Main Street. And you can see all the front doors facing Main Street as well, which is another kind of way to activate that street front, which is something of a unique move for a building. Apartments, a lot of times you have one single entry, you go inside and there's a double loaded corridor, and you can't walk into your front door, which we think is a missing quality of living on Main Street. And so that's why all these units on the first floor that are facing Main Street have a door, so you can take your dog out to go for a walk and not have to go backwards through a corridor to come to a shared entrance to go back out to the front. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is what Paul was showing before on the West Street side. Some of the moves we did, of course, pushing it back allowed for much less exposure of that foundation wall. Still, we have to contend with the significant grade change in the site, but we've certainly subdued it much more than we had before. Also, the element was that we pushed the decks for those units on that back side, allows for some of those proportions to get narrowed up even further, breaking down. On the West Street side, it's certainly more single-family home type buildings. And so we felt that was an appropriate move to help break down the mass of that approach for that side of the building. And this is more zoomed in the courtyard, more of a personal human look at that courtyard. And you can see how in that courtyard, plenty of windows for every one of the units. It's nice to have these buildings broken up, allows more free space of window and natural light for these units. And also that can be peppered with more balconies on the inside. And we think that it's by having the balconies on the courtyard and the rear side, it gives a lot of outdoor space for folks, but not have the front elevation be kind of, we think could be complicating if you had a bunch of balconies on the front elevation. The bay windows will just speak for itself as creating that nice Main Street facade. So yeah, these are just the 2D elevations, so you can kind of understand it flat, and they're here so we can talk about details as you might like. But if you go to the next page, this shows just basically the same kind of elements that we had picked up from studying the AB buildings and how they apply to this. A lot of like the bays, the pitched roofs, the larger voids, the materiality, the shadow lines, the stone walls, the trees, open space, and federal and colonial buildings often really. They're very regimented in their window alignments, and so that's something that we are looking to do as well in this building. And I believe that is the last slide. So I am happy to entertain any questions at this point, and I'm sure as we all are, and looking forward to feedback and taking this to the next step.
Great, thank you. Because we do have 3 different reviews to go through for this, we'll go through each one by one. And we'll start with a site plan. So if anybody has any questions or comments with regard to the site plan, we'll start there.
I was just wondering if Civil could walk us through the water flow across the site into the stormwater management As you're doing that, a question I have, just looking at the contours, it appears that it's about a 5% slope, maybe less than that, going up from West Street to where it ties into.
Yeah, it's roughly about 5%, 6%, except for the handicap parking spaces on that. But essentially, we're flowing, at this point, we're flowing from north to south, you know, from Town Hall down to the existing, and I'm talking about most of the impervious on that. Flat roof, we can internally drain and then capture that and be able to put those back into the stormwater system, which is below parking.
So everything's draining downward to those two black squares and then into the stormwater.
Yeah, so everything's essentially draining this way, and anything from here is going to drain this way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then where does it outlet from the stormwater management?
So, and microphone, forgive me on this. So we have, right now, we have a town culvert that essentially exits here. So we have to pick that up or rework that, go around our stormwater system to a drainage manhole, and then essentially we're going to pick that up, and then we're gonna tie back into that and then come out to the city system at a lesser rate.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's pretty basic part of stormwater. Forgive me for not being too exciting, but you really got to get your post less than your pre, and so those standards are pretty much set.
So clarifying?
Question, I'm not sure which person to address it to, but could somebody give me or us just like a bullet of the square footages before you, the numbers that are in here in the report are very confusing to me as far as the footprint. You say it's reduced, but it looks like it's more. How many, you know, I know obviously you went from 25 units to 30 units, but I just don't seem to get those numbers to work. I know you said something about one of the numbers was incorrect on this plan.
Yeah, the staff report took it from the cover letter, but the cover letter was combined, not individual. So the 9,000 was an approximation for both building footprints. That's how we
Not
talked about the
together. Each building is
Each building is
90?
a little bit over 4,500 square feet.
That's
Okay.
that's the
Footprint.
footprint. So the footprint of each building is about 4,800 square feet. So you multiply by 3, the total gross square footage is around 14,000 per building, so like 28,000 square feet, is that right?
Okay.
No, less than that, it's less than that. It's
It's about, yeah, I mean, it's less than that.
less than that. And so part of the, so the overall square footage is reduced, but also because they're apartments instead of condo units, the average unit size is smaller as a result. And so that's why it also results in a small overall building, but with more units.
Okay, was the end point of the question, because it was confusing how you get that much more with that much less, so.
Right.
Thank you for that. I have another question. In your documentation, you talk about being sustainable and energy efficient, which I really commend you on doing that. I think that's is wonderful, and the town should be pushing that. Another thing to put into our ordinances, I do want to ask, related to that, where are the utilities going to be positioned on and around the building? If you're going to have heat pumps, you need the outside units. Each one is going to have a heat pump, or is it?
Yeah, the plan is to have heat pumps. I don't really want to have any fossil fuels on site.
Right.
And we'll have those on the roof.
Okay, so the exterior units of heat pumps are going to all be sitting, 30 of them on the roof?
Correct.
Okay.
15 on each
Yeah.
roof. Yep.
Okay. And so there's no air, that's air conditioning, I know it's air and heat. I'm just thinking, is there any other outside utilities that have to be on the external portions or
I mean,
in the back?
there's certainly CMP meters that have to be placed, and we haven't got there yet, but they will be, and they'll be appropriately screened if necessary. There'll be utility rooms in each building that'll have all the fire suppression equipment and all the tie-ins to the sewer and to the water. I'm just trying to think what else is, I'm sure there'll be some CMP transformers that we'll have to contend with. Everything will be underground on the site. You know, we'll take it from the pole and put it underground. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
you're welcome.
One more question. Sorry. I'm not sure if it's architecture or civil, but with the stone walls being reconstructed, will it be reconstructed in a dry laid manner like the ones that are currently on site?
Oh, we don't know for sure yet. I think that whatever would be most appropriate. I mean, it's dry stack now, so likely that, in just terms of longevity and so forth and cost, we would be studying that with our contractor.
Okay, I would encourage it to look the same as what's there today, especially if.
Well, I would just say that it could be a little more refined than this now. It is falling apart a little bit, and so that's all. It would be the same stone and stuff, but just more tightened up.
Okay.
That's my.
I would agree.
It's going to be exactly dry laid, just like it is. But as Patrick said, it's not perfect right now.
Right.
It's falling down in places, but dry, yes, that's how I'd like to see it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, can I chime in on that same point? Has there been any historic analysis about that wall when it was created?
I'm pretty sure the current owners built it. It's not that old.
And do you retain the sculpture that's on site, or?
No, the current owners wish to retain the sculpture.
So that'll be.
Yeah, it's a piece of personal property. It's not part of the contract.
Gotcha, okay.
Thanks. Any other site plan questions from the board? Yeah, board?
Your elevation, the building elevations reflect actual topography?
Yes, well, so yeah, our site is modeled as accurately as we can of the contours of the slope with a 10-foot slope. You can see how the grade is sloping down towards the right is the fire station. So the grade is sloping down towards the right. So yes,
It seemed to me on West Street, like you were showing more, I know it's deceiving too. It seemed like your West Street elevation was showing more grade than I sensed when we were out there. I'm not saying you're wrong, but did you make an effort to use actual topo?
Yes, well, we used the topo of what is the rough preliminary design of our civil engineer, which so right now it goes like this, and it drops down really quickly, and so there's a 5% slope of a parking lot in front, and then there's going to be a change to get to the level surface here. So that's what this is. This in the foreground is the rough model of the ledge.
Okay, that's
also kind of deceiving there too, because it's giving some forced perspective. But that's what's, this isn't grade going up to the wall, it's actually like a kind of stone in the foreground.
great. You answered my next question, thanks.
I had one quick question. Are the two buildings, are they at the same elevation, or it looks like they're off just a little bit?
They're dropped as a benefit with the site, so rather than building at the same height, because they're separate buildings, we can also step down the one closer towards West Street at about a foot. It's like trying to find the right middle ground to get appropriate height at the one corner without going too low. They have to do more digging and cutting of the site.
It's also just a nice little break, too.
Yeah, it's beneficial both in terms of scale and economics.
I think this is within the scope of site plan. I think that we were talking about the West Street entrance. That entrance was described as not essential, not required to the flow of the plan. I think I'd only note, in my opinion, that that 48-inch oak tree that is essentially right there is really a significant tree that I certainly would encourage you in mapping out the plan that to any extent that tree can be retained, I think that would be important. Just recognizing that there aren't that many trees of that size and scale in town, and to be able to preserve it, particularly if that's deemed as a non-essential aspect or something that could otherwise be worked around, I think that'd be meaningful.
Well, that's interesting. in a perfect world, we don't need that entrance. We did it because we thought you might want it. If you're saying you don't care about it, we can look at the tree and, I mean, if that entrance made the tree not viable and we can get rid of the entrance to keep the tree, great. I'm not sure that is an equal trade. I just don't know. We don't know. We haven't studied how that tree plays into the total design. But I'm happy to get rid of that entrance. If you think it detracts from anything, because it's not, it's expensive. And given today's incredibly high interest rates, I mean, I put this land under contract 6-7 months ago, and rates have doubled. So it's, you know, if I can save some money and not do that entrance, I'm happy to. If it's not significant to you. Is it?
What's associated with the entrance on the inside of the building, in the core?
It's access points to the upstairs, the stairwells upstairs, and where you can also get there from the, it's not a fire code requirement, you can get there from the interior courtyard entrance. So it's not, functionality doesn't do a lot. It was really aesthetics. And again, if you're not seeing that as a required aesthetic feature for the entry to, from West Street, I'll take it out.
My thought is I'd value the tree over the entrance. My 2 cents.
Can you,
Definitely look at that.
do you have a picture of from the courtyard looking at that building? In other words, if you're in,
Interior courtyard, I don't think we do, no.
so the entrance,
There's entrances in the courtyard at each building, has a main entrance.
so
And
there
that's where
would
it
only be one entrance to get to the upper 2
Correct.
levels from the courtyard area, so anyone coming in would have to either come in through the one or the other end of the buildings, between the 2 buildings.
Yes.
To get to their entrance.
Exactly. Other than the ground floor units, which access from the
Right.
ground floor.
And code doesn't require 2 exits or anything?
Not in a 3-story building of
I
that
have
size.
no
I'm just curious whatever the people's thoughts are.
Is that a design review question or is it a site plan question?
Lynn has a hand up online.
Oh, Len's
too.
got a question? Yeah, Len, go ahead.
Well, I apologize for not being there for the site visit, but thinking as a resident, I would probably always rather walk through a courtyard to my apartment than walk along a main thoroughfare across from a fire department. And so with the parking places sort of equally distributed along the back, it would be hard for me to imagine someone choosing to go to the far side of the building to get to the second floor entry. So I vote for the tree.
I move for the tree too, if we can save the tree. I'm not sure we can, but
So would the trade-off be if the tree can be saved, it's the tree? If it can't be saved, you get back the entrance, or your entrance is gone anyway?
yeah, I mean, again, it was, and I guess that's not your job to design the building. I appreciate that. And I guess we'll study that and look at that between now and our next meeting.
Thank you. I was going to say, this is conceptual
I know.
review, so we're thinking concept, and we, obviously, as we move along, it's up to them to determine what's possible. So let's move on to subdivision then. Any questions?
One more.
Oh, sorry, Lynn, sorry. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. If we're talking about trees, I'm looking at the view from across the street, dead on the front of both buildings. And my question is there, behind those walls, is there any way to break up the center of those 2 buildings with some sort of ornamental tree? It doesn't have to be a huge tree, but it seems you have your 2, you have your jut outs with the nice bay windows and the entryways. And it just seems that, a small tree in between those, if the land is there to do it, and if it's your land to do it, and not the town's.
I guess I'm not quite sure where you're talking about, but we'll.
Yep.
Oh, on that part of it?
Let me see, can I see what you're seeing? Yeah. Do you see the white faces? Yes, right where I love the courtyard and the trees on the outsides of the buildings, but if there could be something to just break up that facade,
Yeah.
if
We
there's
haven't-
ground there.
We haven't really brought in the landscape architect yet.
Oh, okay.
So there's not a final, there's no final landscape plan in any way. This is more the architects throwing some trees up without
Okay.
a lot of study. So thank you. No, that's a great idea, and we'll bring that to the landscape architect, who I think Eric needs to engage.
Thank you.
And the trees they threw up are 15 years old, so if there's,
Yeah.
as we go through this process, help us understand what we're going to have in year two, and,
Yeah, this building's going to be here for 100 years, and that tree's going to start small, and it's going to get bigger, and, yeah, totally.
Thanks. Lynn, any other questions on site plan?
No, thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right, let's move on to subdivision. Do any members of the board have any comments or questions about subdivision? Nope. Nope. Len, any questions about subdivision?
No.
Okay, let's move on to design review. Any questions or comments from the board with regard to design?
you're looking at me. Thank you for being sensitive to our comments. I personally think this is a real improvement. My concern is still scale, and I don't, my question is still scale. So it would be helpful if you could, the comparisons you've shown us are bird's eye view. If we could have some vertical comparison, just without going to too much work for the next meeting.
Of adjacent buildings?
Just something that shows us true vertical scale. I think a couple of the buildings that you might have characterized as 3-story were really only 3 stories at the peak, like the building across the
Yeah,
street.
like 2.5 stories, yeah.
Yeah, so if you could just, maybe a view from, you'd know better than I, but maybe from the fire station, or from the other side of town, the other side of Main Street, just looking down Main Street northerly, that just picks up the height of those buildings with flat roofs and a couple of the other buildings, which are gonna be smaller, but just to show us relative scale would be helpful for me. But I think the building, I think your whole plan is more in line with what I was hoping you'd do.
Great.
Ford, can I clarify your question there? We, from a land use perspective, calculate height in a really unique way. Are you looking for ground up, ground grade to the highest point of the building, just straight up measurement of height for comparison? Like,
It's
for-
32 feet, but I just want, 32 feet with a flat roof is different than 32 feet with a pitched roof. And if you could show us,
Right, we calculate on all sides of the building and take an average and go a third of the way up, and there's a
Oh,
whole
at the Main
20
Street
feet
point,
out.
at the Main Street point.
Street
Yeah,
point,
yeah, I'm
really
sorry.
just ground up, because some of these buildings up here are huge, actually, on the backs. So I
Yeah.
just wanted to clarify what you're getting
is
at.
is there a better way for you to address what my concern is?
Well, so I guess our thought on the scale was that all the buildings that are 2 stories and have a pitched roof will end up being about as tall or taller than this building in general, just in terms of feet. What buildings do, most buildings at 2 stories, is they have a pitched roof to help break the scale down. This building doesn't work at 2 stories. It has to be at least 3 stories for the economics of it. And so our thought was that we study this on different roof structures, and the most successful in terms of the compatibility with the town was a flat roof, because essentially any other roof other than a flat would just add more height and more scale to that location. And so it's really the most successful form that we found. And the only thing that I think could be, maybe challenged about that is that there isn't the context immediately around that building doesn't show a lot of flat roofs. But that's part of why we wanted to share some of the examples of maybe not adjacent to the site, but also further down Main Street, and also just when buildings are built of 3 stories in a downtown Maine, historically, if they're 3 stories, they often would have a flat roof for the same reasons that I'm saying now too, is because it fits better in scale versus pitched roofs and so forth. So to give you a diagram of what that might be, I can see a perspective shot going down Main Street, how like you can say like all these pitched roofs, buildings here, they're pitched roof, they're 2 stories. But the pitched roof means it's like 32 feet, 34 feet, 38 feet, then you have 32 feet here in the foreground. overall height is the same. It just happens that in order for this project to work, it needs to be 3 stories. And so as our way to compromise with that, the flat roof was the most successful in our study. I don't know if that helps or hurts, but that's part of our thought process of why we felt it was most visually compatible.
Anything else?
Like a rendering of what it
Yeah,
would
okay.
look like.
Any other questions from board members with regard to design?
I think there was a comment made about the facade being actually a stone base. Did I misunderstand that?
No, it's a fiber cement. It's just a different material. At the top 2 stories, we're indicating a clapboard material that's around a 5-inch exposure, which is the most common kind of materials you see around. The lower base is just showing a differentiated material. It's a shiplap, which doesn't have an overlap. It is kind of, they more like flat to each other. The reason being is that we saw some of the buildings around, like on Depot Street, they have that shadow line that's cast. It helps give a little sense of detail, breaking down the scale further. And then it's a little bit of reflection of a federal colonial style building of 3 stories of a base, middle, and a top, essentially as well. So the building has a base, a middle, which is the longest expanse, and then it's terminated by a refined cornice at the top with a freeze board. So
That's the distinction, that's the material that fiber cement is the material.
Yeah, so it's still fiber cement for both, but just the material changes from being about that tall to about that tall and a different shape. So it's just, subtle material textural changes gives a refinement that is helpful towards the overall arching issue of trying to break down the scale of the building. We think that is more successful than having too many ins and outs of the building, because these are not very wide at this point now. We think the success is the in and out of open space, and then anything else is, and what you would see in a mill building or any 3-story building, that the things that people love are like all the details that happen around, windows, casing, trims, brickwork, and things like that, which were all relative to what was essentially affordable at the time. And so this is a kind of a refined look at that it's affordable for us to change the selecting material and have it still be a quality material and have all the trim work around that to further refine the look and break down the scale.
So that's material that's unfamiliar to me. I mean, can you point me to an example of another building where that's, are there any other buildings around that use that or a similar material to essentially mimic clapboard siding?
Yeah, so fiber cement, shiplap is just a different type of wood siding that you would commonly see that doesn't have the overlap line. Like a normal lap siding overlaps each other. Shiplaps, they're kind of like butted to each other. And so, yeah, that's very common siding material around many homes in Maine. And maybe, I guess I don't know a specific example of one in Main Street to recall to, but the idea being that it's a change material that's reflective of wood scale.
I understand what shiplap is. I'm trying to understand.
The fiber cement, is that what you're looking for?
Yes, the fiber
Yeah,
cement.
it's frequently used in Freeport. 2 things that come to mind would be the Freeport Crossing Plaza, like the Mass Landing Building. I believe the Hampton Inn on Lower Main Street was one of the first ones. Maybe Antonia's?
Yeah, I
It's
think
pretty,
so.
it's actually been pretty common and accepted by boards in the past as a
That answers my question.
alternative
I
to
understand.
wood.
Yeah, it's sorry. It just it's more durable. It's more durable and holds paint better than wood for a long time. So there's that benefit, and also it still has a heft to it, so that when you look at it and you know that it's not made of plastic, you know that it's like the details as they hit corner boards are solid and firm, and so it really brings back to life what all the wood detail in buildings are. So they're kind of indistinguishable. Whereas like vinyl sidings are a thing that people have concerns about because the materials bend and they make shadow lines and weird connections because of corner boards and so forth. So that is avoided using materials that are meant to replicate the details that would normally occur of wood siding finished construction, which unfortunately is also not really economical in this day and age with the amount of maintenance it would require for a commercial building.
Thanks. Any questions?
I'm going to take another shot at my question.
Right.
Again, I want to compliment you on where we are now. For me, it's all about scale, and I want to make sure I'm comfortable with the scale. What if you stood in the middle of the intersection of West Street and Main Street, facing north on Main Street, take a photo right down the middle that picks up a few buildings on the left, Town Hall, buildings on the right, and then Photoshop this in there. Would that be possible?
Yeah, I mean, on our next round, granted, you see these are just black and white pencil sketches, essentially where we're at in the progress. We wanted to, we want to make sure that we got your feedback before we invested more time in the design and so forth. So, yeah, that's just part of our process, is that we will essentially turn these into color renderings that are more, I guess, realistic, and one of them will be that we can just go ahead and turn the camera so it's looking down Main Street, so you can kind of really understand how that approach is as you enter into town.
Great, thanks.
I had one more material question. The balconies and their railings and the underside, what's the material used?
It hasn't been determined. I would imagine they're aluminum, so that the profiles can be kept thin versus wood, which are bulky and not congruent with the detailing of the building, in my mind.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think it would become most evident from a street side vantage point is the south-facing side of or the back side of the building when you're looking at it from West Street, where there's the parking lot in front of you and the fairly wide balconies there. So the articulation you're talking about sounds like it would help to minimize the effects of that.
Yeah, the renderings are suggesting metal railings. If it'd be a lot heftier if they were if they were constructed out of vinyl or wood, which was not our intention.
Otherwise, I think you did a great job with the vocabulary and this perspective, this kind of sort of forced one-point perspective view with through the courtyard, and knowing that there's a wall in the back and the parking steps down behind that just helps to soften the landscape, and it gives you more of a distant view down to the tree line on Depot Street. So I think that'll be nice.
Great. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Do you have a view from the north side of the north building facing, that would be adjacent to the town hall? And is that pretty much like what the West Street side would be, other than now West Street side still shows that entranceway? Do you have a picture of that side on here?
We don't have one prepared for this, but yeah, essentially it would be very similar to the West Street elevation.
Okay, it would, to me, it would be helpful when we're talking about this tree, no tree thing, entrance, no entrance, if we saw that other side, that would, with one side with the entrance and one without, it would give us at least a comparison of the extent, the length of the building and what it would look like without a cut-in entrance.
Happy to. Yeah, we would plan to do that as part of our next step with you, with the in the process.
Any questions? No? Anything from Lynn?
Yes.
Okay.
I love it. You had to go back to the drawing board. You took all of our comments in mind. I love the design with the bay windows and the pillared entrances, and the entry as an entry to Freeport with that pocket park. I think it's brilliant, and I love the courtyard. So I like everyone else, I'm very appreciative of your having listened and responded in such a good way. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, I guess I'll echo the comments from the board. I mean, you definitely went back and thought about what we said the last time around. It makes our job a lot easier when it's very obvious that you looked at the ordinance, you looked at the buildings in the vicinity, you did some analysis, and this is what you come up with. So I think that's a very successful design. Are there any comments from?
I'm sorry.
Nope, sorry,
Just
yeah.
one more. I'm just going to go back. First of all, I'm going to echo what everybody else has said, that you guys, I've got it on my computer, what you presented last time, rendering, and from the corner, and what it looks like, what the rendering is this time, and it's just amazingly different. And the trees, the corner park, the pocket park, the courtyard, breaking up the facades, bringing it into more of the period. Going back to Ford's comment, I think it would be real helpful because there is the China Rose, which is right opposite, which goes right up to the sidewalk. So it would be helpful to see if you could take, Photoshop in renderings from both sides to the degree that you can. I know renderings are expensive, but just to add that scale, because it is going to be, right now, you've got one side that's close to the road, to Main Street, and now we're going to be bringing the other side close. So it'd be helpful just to see what that looks like. But it's, aside from that, it's looks
Yeah,
great.
we're kind of putting our neck out there a little bit because we're the first player in the game of helping to. So, I mean, if you go further close to the LLB, all the buildings are pretty close to the sidewalk, and that's successful because it creates a street wall. And so we're creating a street wall on Main Street. It just unfortunately happens that no buildings, particularly adjacent to us, have done that yet. Or maybe they, if buildings were to be developed or lots and so forth in time. So that's something that is a bit of a stretch for us, but we think it is the best long-term strategy for maintaining that entry into, now you're getting in downtown Freeport.
That's it.
Thanks. Okay. Other comments from the board? Do any members of the public wish to speak on this application?
You need to have hands up on Zoom when you're done.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Margaret Morfitt, and I'm a resident, maybe 40 years in Freeport. And I think I'm going to echo a lot of what you've already said. I think they've really made huge changes. It's really a lot better. But for me, the corner West Street and Main is really the entrance to downtown Freeport. And right now, it's really a wonderful entrance. It's historic in some ways. It has a sense of stability. It's slightly bucolic. I know that there is no way that a design department can reach that, and I don't expect that, but I do hope that your design will at least symbolize some of those ideas. It's all about the entrance to the town, and we'll be losing a lot from what we already have. So that's very much in mind for me. So my comments are based on the ordinance stating that the building should be compatible. And I'm just like Ford, I'm really worried about the height of these buildings. At the moment, you've matched the stated requirements, but I don't feel as if you really designed a building yet that's visually compatible with the existing structures on the landscape. A flat-roofed, 3-story building on a site that will not look anything like the surrounding buildings. That's just the way it is. It will look like 2 tall blocks. It's helped by the vegetation, but it's still going to be 2 tall blocks. I know you've cited 3 buildings on Main Street that are also 3-story structures, but they're not the same, and I'm sure you really know that. For instance, the China Rose is across the street from your site. It's a street front. It's 2 stories with a section that reaches a 3-story height, but it's pitched, and it has a window in it, and it's not really a 3-story building at all. The same is true on the other side, where there's a building that has a front section that's 2 stories, and then in the back it goes to 3 stories. So it has a forgiveness to it that a 3-story block isn't going to have. And then the third building that you mentioned, and there are really only 3 you mentioned, is the church. And the church is really in no way in the same category as any other 3-story building. We know that. It has huge amount of variety in facade. It has one section that's a steeple, and basically it's not a 3-story building. So that means this is really going to stand out as being different, and it's the entrance to the town, and it's going to block a lot of what you see about the town. It will feel like a hindrance. It won't feel like a welcoming, rural-looking town anymore. So I appreciate that this may not be easy for what you're trying to do here, but I think as a citizen, I just want to represent that there's a lot of reasons to think about this twice, and to hope that maybe you can reconsider parts of your design to try and make it in some way better in scale for what's already existing in the town. I think that's it.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that wish to speak? If not, I will turn it to those online.
You have the Freeport Historical Society. We'll
Okay.
allow them to talk.
Hi, thanks, Caroline. This is Eric Smith. I'm the director of Freeport Historical Society. I just wanted to echo a lot of the comments of the board in terms of thanks for how much more, it seems clearly, the applicant looked at the ordinance and really took very careful look at the surrounding buildings on Main Street. I also want to thank the board for really being very focused on the intention as well as the letter of the ordinance and really helping push this along to the place that it is now. I think that some of my concerns that I voiced at the last meeting of the prior design have really been addressed. When I saw this plan, I was really pleasantly surprised that breaking it up into two buildings really, in a lot of ways, mirrors the buildings that used to be on that site, which were 2.5-story, narrow and deep white Victorian residential buildings. And this really does echo that, which I appreciate. I do certainly hear Ms. Morfitz and Mr. Reike's concerns about scale. And I do think that an additional rendering looking at those nearby buildings will be helpful. But I also appreciate the looking at some of the other historic 3-story buildings with flat roofs, which were most of downtown Freeport in the commercial section. Really, those 3-story blocks with the flat roofs were mostly what was in the center of town. But I do appreciate that this is a residential area. And the scale is a concern. But mostly I just wanted to express a lot of appreciation for everyone in this process. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other members of the public online with hands raised?
No.
Any other members of the public in this room? Yes.
Hi, Mary Davis, Freeport Economic Development Corp. We heard a lot last night about people saying, you know, I want to be able to stay in Freeport, and I want to be able to sell my house. I want to be able to live downtown. And the whole business about being able to kind of age in place in a town that you've been in your whole life. And I look at this and, you know, Brett said, boy, this is the place I'd like to live. And I think you've done a wonderful job of responding to what we've talked about. These could be places where I could see some of the people last night who were talking about, you know, I'd like to be able to live in downtown to live. I understand the economics of a 3-story building because it allows you to be able to then have them to be more affordable for renting. And I think it's important for us to always consider, you know, the folks who are saying, geez, I want to be able to sell my big house and live in downtown. So thank you for all your work. I think this is really so much farther ahead. So just thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments?
Yeah, Andrew Arsenault, I live in town. I was on an ad hoc thing with Paul Peck, and I think they've done a great job turning this project around. And I'd like to support the 3-story concept because it does make them affordable. Like Eric said, there were 2 houses there. They were just 2 or 3 steps off the main street. One had a button shop in at the end, one had a ribbon shop in it. They were 2 old houses. One of the guys I went to school with lived there, in one of them, back when they were residences. I think of the fire station, the original trolley barn that was down the street, which was 3-story in the front. I tried to rally people to save that and convert it into the fire station. Nobody wanted to save it then, sort of like Grand Central Station in Portland. Got torn down. But I think this fits well. Maybe some, you know, small mock-ups, you know, made out of something. But you think of the buildings across the street, right across the street where the salon and that stuff is, when you look at how high it is up off the street to start with, and then it's a 2.5-story, and they're quite large buildings. Right where the bike shop is, when I was a kid, there were 2 very tall buildings that were there. They were apartment houses, and they sat high up off the street. The lot got cut down when the gas station went in there, then became the bike shop. So these are not out of proportion with what used to be Freeport. Patagonia was 3-story on 2 sides, facing West Street and facing Main Street till it burnt. Then Pritham Singh tore the top off it because it was probably more feasible to do it that way. So you look around town, you look at an old New England village, this is not uncommon. The shoe shops that lived down back were much bigger than this. So I don't think it's that far out of character. And I really think that we need to decide, what's going to happen, because I see economically that the rent on storefronts go down and down and down, and that means the taxation value on those buildings go down and down. And I think it's not just dollars and cents. I understand the appreciation of all the other stuff, but I think the economics of what's going on downtown, this will be a benefit for us because we will get tax dollars from every one of these units that we wouldn't get from an empty lot, or that in other spaces we won't get from parking lots. So I think that's all part of the mix, the future of Freeport. So the less taxes go up in Freeport, the longer I can stay. So I really like these. And if he can do away with the side entrance, I'm all for it. So maybe bay windows there or something, But I commend what he's doing, and I think the thing down the middle is great. So I'm all for it. So if that, put my 2 cents in, my vote for it. So thank you.
Thanks. Any other members of the public?
My name is Gordon Hamlin. I've been a resident of Freeport for 48 years. And I want to commend the developer for the changes that you've made in your plan. And I would just reinforce what Mr. Reike said, to really focus on, and as was stated, that I view coming up Main Street from the south, this is really the entrance. This property is really the entrance to Freeport. And we want it to be a place that is representative of the entire town and sensitive to the values that we all have in town. So I would hope that I appreciate all the changes that you made from the initial plan, but you perhaps refine the visual impact of the property as you're coming north on Main Street. And I appreciate the fact that you've added some more open space on the corner of West Street and Main Street. And I hope you'll just see if you could refine that and make it look as inviting as possible for people that come to Freeport, because it is such a critical location. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other members of the public that are in the room or online? Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board?
I have a question because somebody made some comment that made me think of something.
Okay.
The downstairs, the first floor apartments are all direct entry, and you said they're accessible. Hopefully, people that need that get there. Because I don't know whether I noticed this or it's not on the plan, but is there like I'm going to call it a sidewalk that goes all around the building on that first floor level, so people that may be wheelchair can get to them? How else, other than going up steps from some other location?
Yes, all the first floor units would have an entry that would be without a step. We're still working on the floor plan, so we haven't pretty much fleshed out. We just didn't have it ready yet, so we probably have the next one to help clarify these kind of questions. But for example, this is the sidewalk. So in the bottom scheme, there's maybe there's 7 units down here. So there's an entrance here, but there's a unit right here that would actually enter into this corridor inside the corridor into the unit, for example, or go through the corridor to this other unit that one particular, so this looking at the parking is, this is your ramp up, this is your entry to your units here, and then these have entrance here, this one has an entrance here, this one has an entrance, actually this one's fine. So that's how it's all working, so that where it makes most sense to have a unit entry directly out the front door, it is, but where it's kind of right in the corner somewhere that we can't get to it from the outside, it's through the inside door.
The ones that enter, I'm not saying where they enter, but they're on the Main Street side, if those are 4 apartment, 2 in each of the buildings that enter that way,
Yes.
is there a sidewalk other than coming up through the wall? I mean, how would they get there? I don't see a sidewalk over there.
You enter this unit right here, this one right here,
Yeah.
here and here. So there's this is the line, these are the units, and we do have some units here as well on the inside, which are in this little patio.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about the ones that enter from Main Street. Is there how do they, if someone is in a wheelchair, how do they get from the parking lot? You say you have 2 handicap apartments, but if these could all be accessible units, which is what you said, you're designing them as accessible, access, how would those 4 apartments get in if someone was wheelchair bound?
There's also no step on Main Street, so yeah, you park here, come up, and go around to the front door. This is the only entrance into this unit. There's no back door.
Okay.
It's just like a single unit into an apartment building.
And I think there's a difference between an ADA compatible unit and an accessible. I think just technical differences. So there'll be there's ADA requirements for the number of units, fully accessible units that we have to build according to the ordinance or the state ordinance. And so those will be complete ADA accessible. And then the others will be no steps. They won't have the counters lowered, they won't have the bathroom exactly the same, the shower won't be the same, the pull straps for the windows. So some will be completely ADA accessible, others will just be accessible in the sense of you can make a turn with a wheelchair, there won't be any steps. So there's a difference between the 2.
Any other questions, comments from the board? No? Okay, would somebody like to make a motion? By all means.
I move, be it ordered that actually I need a date, the TBD date.
You could do August 30th, 2022.
August 30th. Thank you. Be it ordered that the Project Review Board determines that based on the information provided by the applicant submission dated August 30th, 2022, that the review of the site inventory map, site analysis, and conceptual plan for LWS LLC for a proposed residential subdivision on tax map 11, lot 132, is considered complete as the board finds that the appropriate areas have been determined for development and no open space is required.
Thank you. Is there a second? All right, thank you, Jason. Okay, roll call vote. Berger?
Yes?
Blanchard, yes. Donahue?
Yes.
Monteleone?
Yes.
Reiki?
Yes.
Yankee?
Yes.
Hamlin?
Yes.
All right, great, thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next application before us is the Ingerson 2007 Living Trust, Cunningham Road, Shoreland Stabilization. Hand over to Caroline for a quick summary.
Sure, so as you are aware, the planning board recently last year updated our shoreline zoning ordinance, and one of the things in there is that shoreline stabilization projects come to the review board. So you're having 2 this month. Surprise, I think you'll have another next month. And you'll be seeing more shoreline as they go through the public process before the board. In this case, this is an after-the-fact approval. The applicant installed about 45 feet of riprap to stabilize an eroding bank. Permits from DEP and Army Corps of Engineers are required, and the applicant has applied for those. The area of the riprap is about 1 foot below the hat line and 3 feet above. There was a little bit of wetland impact, about 45 square feet to the coastal wetland. You're only reviewing the application before you, but good to know and understand how this works is the abutting property is next, and these two areas of riprap work together to stabilize the bank in that area. This project didn't require the removal of any vegetation, and they retain the vegetation at the top of the bank. And no new plantings are proposed, just a procedural thing. And again, always take feedback on how we set these up as we see the new applications. This comes under the Shoreland zoning ordinance. Section 306 has about 20 or so standards that you need to do findings on. Many in this case which aren't applicable, like it's not a campground, they don't have signs, they don't have parking. So a lot of them are in NA. It's mostly stabilization, soils, vegetation. So in your staff report, to keep it a lot shorter, I only put the full detail for the standards that really seemed that they were applicable. So if you have feedback on that for the future, I welcome that. And then under shoreline zoning, there's another section with the 9 standards that you use for every single project in the shoreline and out, will it result in water pollution? Will it handle wastewater, historical impact? So just want to point that out. Staff doesn't have any unresolved issues, and Tim Forrester is here to represent the applicant tonight.
Great, thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Tim Forrester with Atlantic Environmental here on behalf of the Helen Ingerson 2007 Living Trust. And as your planner, I think she did a great job of summarizing what has happened here. A couple years ago, an adjacent parcel was added some riprap in an attempt to stabilize some eroded soils. This particular cove is sort of northwest facing. It's very well shaded. There's an overstory of pine and hemlock, and essentially next to no ground cover on sort of clay soils that at the toe of the slope were starting to erode out. So they did what they thought was the right thing and added some stone to keep that from happening, but just didn't recognize that permits were needed. Subsequently moved forward with some additional work on the property that basically triggered additional permitting, so they wanted to replace their pier. And when I was on site, I kind of said, was this riprap ever permitted? And they said no. So that's sort of how we ended up here. The job that they did, I think, is adequate. The stone size varies from like a 6 to 18-inch diameter stone. A bit small. I like to use a larger stone in those areas so that it doesn't move around, but this has been in place and functioning for 2 years. It hasn't really shifted. So I think what's there is adequate and resolves the issues. And we do have after-the-fact applications into the Army Corps of Engineers, Maine Department of Environmental Protection. So those are pending. And as Caroline said, there was no vegetation removal to do this. It was just all brought in by hand and stacked in along the bottom of the slope.
Thanks. Any questions from the board?
I have a few questions. Right now, you're on this particular, we're doing one and then the other, right?
Two separate applications, two separate properties.
You're not proposing to do any other further stabilization or changing anything? This is, the pictures that are in this application are the current, what is current?
Correct.
And what is proposed to be current? I mean, you're not proposing to change.
There's no additional work proposed than what you see here.
Way to phrase it, thank you. So when I look at these pictures, I actually, maybe because I'm not there on site and I'm not asking to go on a site walk at this moment, but it looks like there's already been erosion from the top of these banks because, I mean, I guess some of this, the pictures, this is photograph 3.
Yep.
It just looks like there's erosion, and it looks like maybe there was stumps torn or cut or whatever. And I'm just wondering if this, and some of the stones have also fallen further down towards the water side. So I'm just wondering if this is something that should be kept in this condition and not rebuilt to be a more stabilized riprap protection area with the right size stones. As you said, you would have proposed a bigger stone.
Yeah.
So it bothers me that it's this way, and right now it's expected to stay this way.
Yep, and you sort of hit the nail on the head. That's the first thing I looked at when I first saw this, that I felt the rock size was a little bit small. But it's been in place for over 2 years, and yeah, there's a couple of rocks that have fallen down that you can see. But I think the orientation of this cove being northwest, it doesn't take a storm surge. It's just a fluctuating water level that's causing the problem. And on the upland side, because it's so shaded in there, there's no ground cover. So even an attempt to plant ground cover is going to be very challenging in here. It's all clay soil, and there's just nothing on top of it. And what you see is all the pine needles that are coming off. So that acidic soil type really hinders the growth of other vegetation and under a very shaded canopy. Could we put in some more plantings in there? Yeah, they could try. Some juniper at the top of the rock base would probably be the most successful thing. But in terms of the rock, I really don't think it's gonna move around. There are larger stones in there that'll hold it. If people are walking up and down on it, things may shift around a little bit, but you can pick up one or two dislodged rocks and put them back in place.
Was there a consideration to put in steps going down to the, this little bridge, or is that the dock, a floating dock? That's right now?
No, those two structures, what you're seeing in photograph 4, have been removed. Those are actually on the adjacent parcel.
Okay, so that's what we're going to be talking about on the
Correct.
next one?
Yep. This particular parcel has a dock around the corner on the other side. So their access is actually over there.
I'm not sure how I would proceed with this if I was sitting on a commission that was looking at shoreline protection directly. I mean, I don't know where we come into play here exactly. That's one of the questions.
The standards you have in front of you, you have no purview over steps. The step question, we can't really go there. They could permit that separately, but as far as the riprap, you have the shoreline standards before you, and just like you would with site plan, you need to show that they meet all of those. So there is one specifically for the shoreline stabilization. Most of it honestly is really related to the vegetation. There's one on soil, but if you didn't feel like it met one of these standards, you would have to make that finding.
So if this individual had come to us in advance of doing this, and they said they wanted to put in riprap and protect this, it would be a smart thing to do, most likely. I would have thought we would have had a different design. And I personally don't know what to do with this, because I would not have expected this to be the outcome of a permit we would have given in the first place. So I have a hard time saying, sure, it's fine, because it's what it is, but maybe that's the only way to go right now.
I'm not sure anywhere that gives guidance on, the details on rocks. Do any of the other regulations?
Yeah, so really the only standards in terms of riprap are that they're a regular shaped rock, and that you're not using round, it's not a stacked vertical wall. Its build is correct in terms of its pitch. It's essentially a one-to-one slope. So, and that's the intent, is that any water or wave action that comes up against a riprap wall is dissipated out by the irregular shape of the rock. And if it's vertical, it just smashes into it. So if you slope it, you're spreading it out. So they've met all of that. From, on a typical project, yeah, we usually use bigger stone. But bigger stones have larger voids in between them. And again, I don't see this site as, receiving a direct storm surge that would dislodge the rock that's there. And it clearly has been working correctly for a couple of years, so I personally don't have a problem with how it's functioning.
Questions about the timeline here. So this would have been brought before this board before the work was done in 2020. This board would not have reviewed it or issued a permit.
Correct, it would have gone through the code officer, because that's how we had our ordinance set up and was supposed to go to this board.
Now it's supposed to go to this board.
Yes, because we are consistent now with shoreline zoning minimums.
But what is being sought here is a retroactive permit.
After the fact, yes.
I don't understand how we have jurisdiction to issue a permit in 2020 when we didn't have authority to be able to do that in 2020.
It needs to get permitted under DEP standards. We had conflict between our ordinance and DEP standards. Now that we've corrected it, they couldn't get a permit from the code officer now because our ordinance doesn't say that. So they're coming in with what we have now, which has to go to you guys. They need to permit it from somebody now after the fact because they didn't permit it under who our ordinance said they should have at the time. That makes sense. So it's coming before you. You don't have any standards here regarding detail of the appearance of the riprap or the size of the rock. Most of your things about stabilizing the vegetation, the soil is fertile, the vegetation. So a lot of these are A.
Am I correct in asking or stating that we're not giving a permit now that is going to be backdated? We are giving a permit today. It just happens to be after the fact of this permit. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the motion here is after the fact approval for a shoreline stabilization project. It's after the fact.
So I mean, it's a today permit. It's going to be dated as of whenever we give it, which is why I'm kind of asking, if this was in front of us today, with the way the ordinances read today, would we have looked at this application and said, if we had been given a picture like, oh, we have one that we just did and we're going to make it look like this, is this something that we would have looked at and said, well, that looks like the appropriate type of riprap? And it's not just I totally understand this. I did this in commissions for many years in other towns. So I understand, the size of stones. I'm just saying that it just doesn't look like what I would have anticipated a riprap wall I'm calling it a riprap wall for storm management of the surge of the water. It's just not what I would have thought, and I probably would have had a lot of issues and not been agreeable to approve it if I thought it was going to look like this.
Just like any other thing that comes before you, you can't design it. You're reacting on the information the applicant submits you. Just because it's after the fact, you don't have to approve it. If it doesn't meet the standards, you make a finding as such, and the board doesn't approve it. It's the same standards, and even though it's after the fact, they still have to meet it. In this case, there's nothing here, though if you were designing it, it sounds like you might design it different. We don't have a standard saying exactly how they need to design that riprap.
I'm not saying I know that we would say how to design it. I'm just saying that I would have seen an application come in, and it would have had drawings. It would have had some drawings from the engineer, and it would have shown with existing condition and what the type of wall would look like, and then we would have been asked to, approve that wall, not design it. And if this is what they showed as this is the anticipated endpoint, I would have said, I don't think that's an appropriate riprap wall. So I'm just giving my opinion right now is I have a hard time approving it because I would not have approved it if it was in front of me as without me seeing these pictures. If they said, this is what it's going to look like, anticipated, this is what it's looking like, I would say, I think we need to redesign.
But what I'm asking, under what standard? What standard are you saying they don't meet? If you're not going to approve something, you have to show that they don't meet one of these shoreline zoning standards that you guys have to do the findings on.
From my past understanding, I don't think, what I ever always knew of a riprap wall on a shoreline edge, it was much more, this to me, as I said, it looks like it has been falling apart. So if this is what they did, it kind of looks like, well, they threw a few stones. They weren't placed strategically so that they could hold sufficiently any of the water coming against it. It just looks like they took a wheelbarrow. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying what it looks like to me. It almost looks like someone stood there and dumped the wheelbarrow and then kind of pushed things around to make it look like it's a riprap wall. To me, it's not a riprap wall from my experience.
Yeah, go ahead for it.
We are dealing with something that's in the ground already.
I know.
And I think the best, I know Tim Forrester is the go-to person, he's the authority in the private sector on this stuff. And I think for it to be in the ground and for him to be saying it's adequate is really the most I could hope for.
In other circumstances, if a permit wasn't issued that was required at the time by the code enforcement officer, do penalties apply for the failure to get the permit at the time?
That's not really something that's under the purview of us, the project review board, but if someone comes in after the fact for something, we don't really charge them like a double fee or anything like that. Whether or not, when they get their shoreline permit, the code officer charges them a double fee, I don't know, but.
So what incentivizes people to actually come before us in the first place?
Well, if they don't take care of it, then they could get a notice of violation, face a court proceeding. They're in good faith effort coming in after the fact, late, realizing they should have got approval first and trying to get approval to show it meets the standards.
Comments?
Well, I'm still trying to understand what we add to this process. What in our ordinance what do we cover that isn't covered by the intense scrutiny of the DEP and Army Corps?
That's a great question. I think, you have a set of standards before you. They're somewhat general in what they ask. And if it were me, I would be looking to make sure, again, this is a unique case that, we are after the fact, but, are they not putting in more stone than necessary? Are they not removing any additional vegetation? Are they maintaining shoreland zoning standards? You're allowed, a point of access to do the work. Are you going to revegetate those areas correctly? Those are the things that I think you look for.
If we didn't look for them, wouldn't DEP and Army Corps be looking at the same thing?
Yes.
But we do have we have our own standards. We, as the municipality, are the ones that have to look at the shoreline zoning standards, which you have before you. DEP is the NRPA permit, which is a separate branch of DEP. They might have overlapping standards, but they're their own separate set of standards. And then, yes, Army Corps has another set of their own standards, and they could overlap. Here, we're the shoreline zoning standards.
DEP applies shoreline zoning standards to these the stabilization projects.
That's an interesting one. So before the state, you're applying for the Natural Resource Protection Act. You're not following shoreline zoning rules. The shoreline zoning coordinator does look at the NRP application and may make comments on it, but that really then shifts shoreline zoning back to you. So we're getting a NERPA permit where we technically have to follow the NRPA rules, not the shoreline zoning rules. That's to you guys.
You're still waiting for permits, though. This is not completed.
So, yep, we are pending permits from DEP and the Army Corps.
Are there any questions or comments from the board about the application and not process? Lynn, do you have any questions?
No, I'm fine, thanks.
Are there any questions or comments from the public? Online?
There are no hands up online.
I guess I just like to say riprap, it generally looks good the day it goes in, and then it's a declining process as nature takes over after that. So, I mean, this appears to show the evidence of nature having its effect. And we don't usually get to see what happens after the fact, so it doesn't seem like this is inconsistent with reality to me.
Any other comments? I had to do shoreline stabilization myself, and it's a horrendous process in which DEP and Army Corps of Engineers are actively involved and have professionals with expertise in this area. Unfortunately, this board has no expertise or even really familiarity with this issue. With that in mind, I would move for approval of the permit expressly subject to issuance of, from the DEP and Army Corps of Engineers. And in this case, because it's an after-the-fact review, also subject to a review by the code enforcement officer to determine whether or not any kind of, penalty review should apply at his discretion.
Well, that's.
I mean, it's after the fact, they haven't been cited with a violation or anything like that. I don't feel like that's our job to get involved, whether or not the town pursues giving someone a penalty or double fees. That's beyond us. The outside agency reviews are fine, but they are independent of your review and your standards. So them denying something, what standard is that gonna change here that you're gonna find they don't meet?
No, I'm saying that if DEP denied the project, then the project can't go forward. And so if the project can't go forward through DEP, then I don't think that this board should be signing off on something that otherwise has been rejected. Again, in these circumstances, I think that we should put some deference to these boards that actually have expertise in this area.
So essentially, if you guys feel like this meets the standards before you tonight and you take action, they know they are still responsible to get permits from other agencies that require permits. If those agencies deny it based on something and they have to change it, they're gonna have to come back to you and amend what you approve here tonight.
But as you always include, and I see it in the number 2 of the proposed approval that you have here. Number 2 says, to get the permit, that they have to obtain applicable permits, Freeport Code Enforcement Officer, and why would we not be including Army Corps of Engineers and the DEP in that sentence, which would cover the fact that they need to have those?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can. I just want to be clear that we can't rely on them to review applications that we're reviewing under our own standards on our behalf. So as long as everyone's clear with that. And the code officer has gone through these. He hasn't issued any permits, but as soon as they come in, he's the shoreline zoning expert in the building, so he has gone through them.
The federal and state agencies make those same comments as well, that, while I may have a permit received from them, that doesn't preclude our responsibility to come before the town. So, if whether you're saying it or they're saying it, we all know you got to get all your permits and they all have to agree, or you're not consistent, you're in violation.
And that's also the way coastal waters works too.
Yep.
And I think what I'm saying is that I would encourage that this board insist that those permits, the DEP and Army Corps of Engineers permits, be issued and in hand before parties come to us to seek this much more general standard of what the test that we apply.
If we look at amending the shoreland zoning ordinance, I think we can make that a requirement. It's not a requirement that we have today.
Okay, well, with that in mind, I would move that we approve it subject to the issuance of all required permits.
You don't need town approval to get a permit from Army Corps or DEP, do you?
So, no, I do not.
Yeah, so I think that does make sense, just.
know, let
Put it
people-
as a condition to make it aware on record.
Yeah, so
And give people the guidance in the future that come to us last.
Right,
So-
but we can't deny them on that because we don't have a standard that says you need to. Like Coastal Waters has a standard pertaining to that. We don't have that.
But if you tell them to come last, they'll just come last, right?
We can adopt the practice of tabling it until we see that all of, everything else is
I
in
think
order.
as we try out these shoreland standards and we see all these new applications, like stream crossings, for example, we're gonna find changes that we wanna make to the ordinance to improve our process and documentation. So I think they're all great comments, we need to look at them, but we don't want unclear ordinances and unclear submission because we have enough of those.
So just to touch on that a little bit in terms of understanding the whole scale of the process of a normal project, from the time someone calls and said, hey, I have an erosion issue, can you come take a look at it, to when we actually, determine and figure out, come up with a plan, line everything up, submit applications, the state has 3 weeks to accept and 4 months to act on it. So I'm 5 months from when I actually submit an application to DEP. And right now, they take every bit of it. So it's a challenge when you have to do this one, then you go to this one, and then you go to that one. You're stretching that out over many, many additional months. And you still run the issue of, okay, DEP said okay, the Corps said okay, but the town wants me to do this. Okay, well now I gotta go back to DEP and the Corps and I gotta change those. So if you can kind of work with them all at the same time, it seems to go better. 99% of the time, there's not too many changes that are made.
But DP often does ask for changes.
In the shoreline stabilization work, they can, yep.
So isn't it important that we have the sense of what those changes may be before we act? Otherwise, we're going to revisit it here anyway?
I guess what I'm saying is it's sort of, it kind of goes both ways. Whether you suggest a change or whether they suggest a change, and again, going back to the whole timing of it all, a lot of these people are ambitious to try to resolve an issue that's ongoing, and to drag it out. And honestly, this work is preferably done in the wintertime. So sometimes these delays can kick it out into a whole nother year, and they could lose another 5-10 feet of frontage. Not that it shouldn't be done correctly or avoids, and not follow the standards before you. But I always try to get it all to happen, closer together than spreading it out like that. The changes that DEP has ever made on any of my projects, not so much in the design of it, maybe some additional plantings, but in general, you have a length, you have a width, you have a height, and you have a pretty standard design for a lot of stabilization work.
One of the portions of a motion from last month that I'm just looking at, because I know you have this in some of the application approvals. I mean, this one says the applicant obtain any applicable permits from Freeport Code Enforcement Officer. So that's what I'm saying, we can add the other two or any other state, any other, and just leave it for those two right now. But include the statement that you often say, and any changes that would affect this permit must be brought to the staff or the commission if so required.
It would have to come back to you. I think it's fine. I think you can tack it on. It doesn't hurt anything as long as everyone's aware that there's 3 different bodies. You're doing 3 different things with some overlap. You can only look at what you have before you. They're not looking at your standards for you. So as long as you guys are making findings on those things to the best of your abilities, and as we find areas that we need to clarify or get additional training on, we will go ahead and do that. If somebody wanted to make a motion that's here today, I did notice that we did use our standard language, but the standard language has before any site work, so we would want to strike that and just say the applicant obtain whatever you want to add on.
Wait, number 1 you're talking about?
No, number 2. 2.
Oh, site work, yeah. I would have said in number 1, there's also an issue with this particular set of applications. The approval incorporates by reference all supporting plans that amend the previously approved plan submitted, and obviously for these two, there have not been any previously approved plans, unless they've done something 100 years ago that was totally different. I mean, doesn't that mean anything else that they would have
If
put
they
in?
had approval in the past for something, this would supersede that. I do not know if they have other old approvals in their
Just
file.
seems bizarre to add that as part of
Yeah,
the-
that's standard language that we've been using.
All right, can we move this on? I think we're,
Yes, please. Would anyone like to make a motion? Jim,
I need to do one, since the motion's going to incorporate all your submissions, on your submission to us, in the part of your letter to us where you recite our requirements and then you have your response in bold, on E,
Those actually aren't your requirements, though. Those are site plan requirements. You're not doing site plan here.
so it's not a problem?
Nope, because you're only doing shoreline zone requirement.
Okay,
You're
you
not
said
doing
did when you
site
meant,
plan
when I think
review.
you meant did not, but if it doesn't matter, it doesn't.
I'll take a stab at this. Probably oversimplify it, Linda. So I'd like to move, be it ordered that the Freeport Project Review Board approve a shoreland zoning permit for Helen Z, and I'm sorry, the name, pronounce?
The applicant, it is the Helen Ingwerson 2007 Living Trust.
I apologize on the pronunciation. Ingwerson, 2006 Living Trust, Helen Shaw Ingwerson trustee, for and after the fact shoreline stabilization project approximately 45 feet in length at a residential property at tax assessor map 5A lot 3140 Cunningham Road to be built substantially as proposed in the application dated August 10th, 2022, finding that it meets the standards of section 306 and section 404 of the Town of Freeport Shoreland Zoning Ordinance with the following conditions of approval. This approval incorporates by reference all supporting plans. I'm going to stick with the existing language here, that amend the previously approved plans submitted by the applicant and their representatives at the Project Review Board meetings in hearings on the subject application to the extent that they are not in conflict with other stated conditions. 2, prior to the start of any site work for the project, the applicant obtain any applicable permits from the Freeport Codes Enforcement Officer. 3, this approval is subject to approval by Maine Department of Environmental Protection and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Is there a second? All right, thank you, Jason. Roll call vote, Berger?
Yes.
Blanchard, yes. Donahue?
Yes.
Montleone?
Yes.
Thank you. Reiki?
Yes.
Yankee? Yes. Hamlin?
Yes?
All right, great. It's unanimous, Sharon. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Great,
Oh,
thank
wait,
you.
here we go. The next application, another one on Cunningham Road.
This one is slightly different.
Okay.
So they stabilize approximately 65 feet, a little bit longer than the other one. They did have, they went 1.5 feet up below the hat and 3 feet above. They did have a little more wetland impact on this one, 97.5 square feet. They didn't have to remove any large vegetation. There was some smaller vegetation that was removed, that they removed to access the site. And they will need to do some restoration. They retained much of the vegetation that was on the top of the bank. There is an existing area of riprap higher up on the slope that they're removing and they're revegetating with shrubs. I think Tim could clarify the vegetation removal and replanting and then kind of talk a little bit about why they're removing the riprap. It would be helpful.
Thank you.
And then there also was a set of stairs with this project, but you do not have purview over that. That comes under a permit from the code officer.
Great. Well, good evening. I'm Tim Forrester with Atlantic Environmental here on behalf of Ellen Zadeb at 34 Cuttingham Road. So this particular project is sort of the beginning of what happened here, and it feathered into the other piece, because while they did this, they said, hey, we might as well just do this on your side so that it's all done. So that's kind of how that part happened. In this particular one, you can see in photograph 2, there's some riprap that extends up to the top of the bank. That's where the stone was actually brought down to the shore and moved along the shoreline and put in place, and they just stopped at that point. So that is unnecessary rock. We typically will go 2 to 3 feet above the highest annual tide, which allows for potential sea level rise, stormwater surge, and to further help stabilize that lower section. So that area of stone needs to be removed. And in place of that, you'd have exposed soils that have been smothered out, so that area will be replanted as well. Again, typical plants that work well are to do juniper, creeping juniper right above the top of the riprap. Tends to get a good foothold, have a good root structure, and will cascade down the rock face to help hide it a little bit. Moving uphill from there, we usually try to encourage people to go with a lot of bayberry. It's low growing, again, with a good root structure, and both of those do relatively well in poor soil conditions with real acidic soils and low loam cover. And what else did they need to do there? So this particular project was triggered by the replacement of the pier, and it was at that point that I said, hey, you have some other things going on here that clearly aren't permitted. So, in forthcoming, let's go meet with the code office and say, here's what we have. We want to resolve this, and we're coming to you. And Nick provided us with a laundry list of to-dos, which they've done a great job at taking care of. There was a path that had some pea stone on it. The pea stone's been removed. It's been replaced with an erosion control mulch. They had a fire ring with some additional pea stone around that. So those are considered structure in the shoreland zone that's not functionally water dependent. So all that has been removed as well. And as she said, the stairs aren't really your purview. There was an old ramp and float that was just left on shore. That has also been hauled away. So she's done a great job at bringing everything back into compliance as it should be. And now we're just kind of following through these last procedural steps.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments from the board?
Ditto.
Were there trees cut as part of this work that was done?
There was one tree at the top of the hill, or again, you can see. I think you can see the stump there in photograph 2. But that tree was dead, so they removed it.
That was that cutting in the forest in the shoreline zone independently reviewed by the code enforcement officer?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Was that cutting reviewed by the?
I don't know if Nick was aware of when that was removed, if they asked permission to remove that or not. Typically, dead hazard trees are you're allowed to move those. Most cases, Nick would, the code officer Adams would allow us to go ahead and do that. There's no permit to remove those trees. You just need to meet the standards.
Usually Nick comes out and looks at it and says, yeah, that's dead.
He does sometimes. I've asked him to come out and look at stuff with me. Other times it's been pretty straightforward, but I always form a dialogue with him, so there's record of it.
Any other questions from the board? Does Lynn have any questions?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Do any members of the public wish to speak on this application? Online or in person?
There are no hands up online.
If no further questions or comments, I will entertain a motion.
I will do it again. I move, be it ordered that the Freeport Project Review Board approve shoreland zoning permit for Alan M. Zadib for an after-the-fact shoreland stabilization project approximately 75 feet in length at a residential property at tax assessor map 5A, lot 32B, 34 Cunningham Road, to be built substantially as proposed in an application dated August 10th, 2022, finding that it meets the standards of Section 306 and Section 404 of the Town of Freeport Shoreland Zoning Ordinance with the following conditions of approval. This approval incorporates by reference all supporting plans that amend the previously approved plans submitted by the applicant and their representatives at the Project Review Board meetings and hearings on the subject application to the extent that they are not in conflict with other stated conditions. 2, prior to the start of any site work for the project, the applicant obtain any applicable permits from the Freeport Codes Enforcement Officer. 3, 3, this approval is subject to approval by Maine Department of Environmental Protection and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Thanks, Todd. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ford. Roll call vote. Berger?
Yes?
Blanchard, yes. Donahue?
Yes.
Montleone?
Abstain.
Abstain. Reiki?
Yes.
Yankee?
Yes.
Hamlin?
Yes?
Okay, thank you. Did you get that?
Was there one abstention?
There's one abstention for Montleone.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, the next item on our agenda tonight is the Desert of Maine Site Plan Amendment. And we'll turn it over to Caroline for a quick overview.
So the Desert of Maine has been before you a few times. One of the more recent times they got approval to do some alterations at the campsites there. They've had a lot of campsites out there for years. Previously, you gave approval for 18 cabins. They built, I believe, 6 of them. They have decided that the A-freight cabin needs to be changed, the design. So they're switching to a new design of cabin. There's actually a decrease in the number of cabins, not the number of campsites. They're gonna switch one of them to a 10 RV site, and then they will go down to 17 cabins instead of 18. Overall on site, this will still be a decrease in the amount of impervious area, so it didn't require any changes to stormwater. There should be no change in traffic from this, and again, no new campsites are being created. Along with this, this season, they did some temporary activity permits. The Tuttle Barn, if you're familiar with the application, they're restoring a barn that they're gonna use for performances. The barn is still being restored, so they had a tent and they did some programming in the tent, I believe including a few concerts. So they want approval to leave the 20 by 40 tent on the site seasonally so they can use it to supplement their programming. It would be located on the desert. I did get one comment from Alpha One when they looked over the proposal. This isn't in the application today, but Alpha One did flag that it doesn't appear that there's an accessible route from the existing accessible route at the end of the boardwalk to the tent. So that was something they flagged. Maybe they could put like a beach mat down to make sure you're maintaining that.
Sorry, that's from who?
Alpha One, they do consulting for accessibility issues, and they watch all our agendas and give feedback if there's areas for
Thank you.
alterations that an applicant could make. And then I think the other thing that we need a little more information on is they're proposing to have this 20 by 40 tent and are proposing to use it seasonally. I don't know what the intent is, if they're gonna continue to do music. Obviously, we do have some abutters nearby. We do have standards for noise that are most strict in the residential area. So that's, I think, one outstanding question that we could use a little more information on. Otherwise, no other changes.
Okay, thanks, Caroline.
Yeah, I'd love to, I don't know if someone could wake up the TV.
Yeah, let me go see if I can do that while you wanna start.
But we have some photos of the tent. So I thought we'd do this in 2 parts, just start with the tent, and then I'll introduce our architect, Tracy Reed, to discuss the cabins. There we go. So, as Caroline mentioned, the tent was an experiment this year just to do some, we primarily use this structure for our affiliated nonprofit, which operates on site. It's the Desert of Maine Center for Arts and Ecology. And the primary use has been, this year we received over 25 school groups that come to learn about the ecology, the interesting ecology at the desert, and some of the history. So it's a great place to gather students out of the sun. They can, there's a little historical reenactment, some activities, and before they go out on the property, it's a way of like sort of, giving them some instruction and having some activities. So that's been the primary use. This year we are waiting for our barn to be renovated. We have a barn on site has been taken down and is being restored beam by beam, post by post. And we anticipate that will go up over the winter. Right now we're just about to submit our building permit for that. So that's really the plan all along, has been to do our musical events there. But we did a short summer art series for mostly acoustic concerts in that space. That is not the primary intent of the space. It's mainly for hosting these school groups, however. Once the barn goes back up, I do think there is a chance we would continue to use it for occasional musical events, but obviously the reason we're building the barn is primarily to host those musical events. So I guess we just want to make it a permanent part of our site plan. It's been a very successful addition to the property, and just hoping to keep it going.
Will this be permanent even after the Tuttle barn goes back up?
Yeah, I think the primary use being for the education, that need will continue. And the barn, when it's reconfigured as a concert venue, will just be, it's too big of a space. It just doesn't, this is perfect because the kids, it's easy for them to, it's easy to get to it, and it sort of contains their energy better than we think a barn with a stage and seats would contain their energy.
Caroline, has the tent been brought to us before?
No, tent is new. They did it under a temporary activity permit from the code officer this past year to try it out.
Okay. And there are other tents in town that go up seasonally out at the farm. There has been, maybe not for a while, but have they also been required, or is it a district issue?
I think we should focus on the application before us tonight.
I'm just trying to find out what the difference is, why we're
well, we
acting on this if
we don't permit temporary structures. We would only treat them as a permanent structure because temporary aren't allowed, even though we know this isn't going to stay up. But it's a change to their approved site plan. They had no structure there before. It's significant square footage, and it'll be a change to the way they're doing things. We do see some tents. We've seen some under temporary, the seasonal outdoor seating. We've seen them under that provision. We've seen some for like one-day events or short-term events. People will get the temporary activity permit, and there could be others that we're not aware of.
Okay, fair enough.
Is there a definition of a structure? If it's a tent and it has no floor or base into the ground, does that call it a structure or a permit? I mean, a tent is a tent when it's up with 4 posts or 8 posts or whatever. I mean, so would that hit some other thing in our ordinance?
Gathering data.
Sorry, I'm trying to pull it up, but
And would that make a difference with what we're permitting?
While she's looking that up, have there been any comments from neighbors about noise or?
So we have one neighbor who's our closest neighbor. I
I think during none of the kid, the field trips or any of those things have any significant noise impact. But one of our concerts was amplified, and I did get a note from our nearest neighbor. She asked me to come sit in her driveway and hear what it sounds like from her house. And it admittedly, it was loud. It was very pleasant music, but yeah, it was loud. I measured it. It was 40 decibels, so far, like 10x below what we would be required to be. But nonetheless, yeah, she could definitely hear it. So I think we've since had discussions. We really work closely together on these issues because anything that happens at the desert impacts her the most. And so we actually had a conversation last week that if it did continue to be an ongoing use, to do outdoor concerts, she'd like them limited in number. And we talked about during a 3-month season, she'd like to see no more than 6, which seemed more than fair for us. So on nights when we have a concert, we try and give her adequate notice. She's asking for as much notice as possible, so she's not inviting dinner guests over, that sort of thing. We often offer to send her out to dinner those nights. But it's something where it's working well. We've always worked well together.
So 2 things. Regarding noise, we have standards in the ordinance, I believe, daytime hours, or one of them was 55 decibels. But they do have to meet any noise requirements that we have, and then they also need to comply with not regulated by this board or enforced by us, but we have a loitering curfew and noise ordinance that they have to adhere to for the hours of certain things that go on in town. So Linda, here's your definition of a structure. A combination of materials to form a construction for use, occupancy, or ornamentation, whether installed on, above, or in the surface of land or water, excluding walls, fences, mailbox, lamppost, birdhouse, or similar construction, outdoor swimming pools, and ground-mounted solar panels or structures.
So it's a structure.
Yes.
Definition.
Yeah, very broad definition.
I'm a little concerned about allowing this for concerts, because we had so much discussion about the use in the barn for concerts, and we were all, agreeable that that was a good location. But now you have, if these concerts at night where sound always seems to travel faster, it's really an open venue. It seems to me like it's, maybe, I just don't see that right now that it's necessary, although it's not me to say what's necessary. It just seems to me like it's an excessive use for something that was creating questions before when we eventually gave you permit for an indoor venue.
Would you feel comfortable if it was while the barn is under construction?
As a
Limited?
temporary use
Yes.
for music?
Yeah.
That makes
Something like
more
that.
sense if it's temporary, sure.
That is true.
Because that's what you've gotten. You've gotten the temporary use.
Well, yeah, I think the problem with a temporary permit that we got is the putting it up and taking it down is a significant amount of effort. We'd like to leave it up, the structure up for the season.
I'm not concerned about the structure being up. I'm concerned about the use of the structure that would create additional impact because, in certain times when you would have concerts in an outdoor structure permanently allowed. I mean, once we give the permit, you could do it whenever you want.
Well, you could say.
We could
for
say
music
from this
until-
time until, but
I'm so sleepy, okay.
I'll mute her.
I just don't,
As members of the public here, so loud.
I don't know if it's necessary personally.
I guess I question if they've been doing it and it hasn't been a problem, and the only neighbor who raised a concern has been satisfied and isn't here tonight, I don't know whether we need to go beyond what's.
We do regularly hear from, I'd say, the neighbor. She's been involved in the process. She's been at meetings here. But again, I think we have standards and they need to demonstrate that they're meeting those standards. If there's concern for the noise level, we could have them demonstrate provide their decibel test just to show that they're complying. you know, if there's concerns for traffic, if they were going to increase the use, you could address that.
Are you proposing to increase the use, or are you just proposing to continue the same activity but make this a permanent structure instead of temporary?
Make it we became aware that we need to add this to our site plan and put it before the board. So, yeah, we'd like to make sure we go through the process as required. We're not proposing that we, have this new outdoor concert as a regular thing. I think it's going to take some time for our barn to be built. So that's what we did this year. We did 4, by the way, very small concerts, about 40 people attending, just so no large impact on traffic or anything like that. Yeah, I think if we think the barn will likely be up by next year, but we're not sure we'll be able to have concerts in the barn next year, just because of making it accessible, fire suppression, all that will take time to put in place before we can invite the public in that space. So we think there'll be another season where we're possibly unable to host concerts in the barn.
Would you anticipate, once that barn is functional, that you might have 2 different concerts going on?
In the same season or at the same time?
Same time.
No, never at the same time. No, that's insane. No, we would never do that. But I would say as an ongoing use, it's an incredibly beautiful place to see a concert, and being an outdoor concert is something that I think we'd like to have as part of a summer art series, a few. It's just a really unique landscape, and to have an outdoor concert is really great for kids and families, kids running around. It's just beautiful. So I think primarily we would have everything in the barn, but we'd like to have, if you're asking whether we, once the barn is built, we would have no more, I think that would not, our preference would be that we'd be allowed to do a few. Yeah.
Okay, I do want to continue on to the cabin discussion.
Sure.
Just to make sure we're covering everything. We do have a time limit on the meeting tonight, so we just want to make sure we get under the...
Sure. Well, I'd like to introduce, Tracy Reed from Dexterous Creative, our architect for the cabins.
Okay. Okay, how exciting. All right. As Doug mentioned, thanks, Doug. As Doug mentioned, we are also doing an amendment for the cabins. And so as you guys had looked at it last year, there were 18 cabins. This is the site plan from last year. Again, 18 cabins. The redesign drops us down to 17. And again, there are 6 cabins that have been built. Next slide, please. Okay, so these were the 3 cabins you looked at last year. The one on the left is from Harriman and has not been built. There have been 3 of each, the small and medium, which are at the right. And they are the Cozy and, what did I forget the other name? This Escape, thank you. Next slide. Okay, so apologies for it being faint on here. These are the existing built cabins. So we have the 3 larger ones and the 3 smaller cabins that are in place today. All right, next slide. Okay, so this is a comparison between the existing previous site approval at left and our proposal at right. Campsite 5, which is in the green circle, is the one that is being reduced. We're just going to keep that as it is now. Currently, it's a camp and a campsite / RV site. Again, 3 ADA sites. We have a couple different designs just to try to capitalize on some of the natural elements. While I've got this up, you'll see two of the sites are not on the road. They require a walk-in or a hike-in. And due to some of the topographical features, those won't have bathrooms. The other ones will. Next slide. So ours are, we're moving away from the A-frame design. Perpendicular walls are helpful, especially if you are not vertically challenged like myself. So, all right, so our ADA one is it's a full ADA. It's got its ramp, its turning radius, its push-pull, all of the wonderful things. We're not going to have heating cooling elements, but we are having hot water. So electric, a small electric hot water heater. Really trying to prioritize connecting with nature. One of the things previous cabins did not have are operable windows and screens, which you can imagine, it's buggy. So we do have some large fixed windows, but we also have some awnings, and a sliding glass door, so people can enjoy the outside without the outside coming in at night. And then we have our the movable fire pits, and so these are larger. The difference between the Eastern Pine and the Juniper are the ramp, largely, and grab bars in the bathroom. Otherwise, the design is about the same. Next slide. Okay, the spruce is for these. This is the one that doesn't have the bathrooms on the sort of more remote sites, and are have the door on the wider side out to the campsite. Next slide. Okay, and this is the balsam fir. Also, again, our goal for the builders is try to make these as similar as possible. Again, really prioritizing views to nature. As you'll see, we are reducing impervious surface by trying to better situate these on the existing impervious RV pads, which Owen and Haskell has surveyed for us previously. So as you can see, I believe we have a total, the amount of impervious surface we're going to be adding is being reduced on this by 368 square feet. Is this our last, this might be our last slide, maybe it's not. Okay, yes, so this is basically it. Again, just trying to, after a year of operation with the existing 6 cabins, just trying to get some feedback from guests and from maintenance, and it turns out that sometimes A-frames are more beautiful on the internet than they are in real life. So perpendicular walls are preferred in real life. So
These also sit lighter on the land.
yes, that's
Our A-frames require huge footers, big overdig.
very heavy. Yeah.
So these would be a lot less impact to actually dig the foundation.
That's our goal. Yes. So anyway.
Thanks.
Did the previously approved A-frames, did those have bathrooms in them?
The medium ones did, yes.
Couldn't remember.
Smaller ones did.
And there's also, on the existing site, there is a bathhouse. So the two that don't have bathrooms are very close to the bathhouse. So.
Any questions from the board on the change in cabin type? Does Lynn have any questions?
No.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board on the application?
And you still have one person
we do have-
online. Sorry, you can't see it up there, so.
Okay, yeah. If not, we'll see if any members of the public have a comment on this application.
Eric, would you like to comment on the application? If so, raise your hand. No hand.
Okay.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, motion sounds good.
Motion reads as follows. Be it ordered that the Freeport Project Review Board approve the printed findings of fact and a site plan amendment for Heastan Family Holding LLC for a site plan amendment with changes to include Changes to design of previously approved guest cabins and the addition of a tent to be used seasonally at Desert of Maine, tax assessor map 22, lot 8, to be built substantially as proposed. Application dated 8/31/22. Finding that it meets the standards of the Freeport zoning ordinance with the following three conditions of approval. 1, this approval incorporates by reference all supporting plans that amend the previously approved plans submitted by the applicant and representatives at the project review board meetings and hearings on the subject application to the extent they're not in conflict with other stated conditions. 2, prior to construction, applicant obtained applicable building permits from the Freeport Code Enforcement Officer. And 3, conditions of approval from past approvals are still applicable.
Thank you, Ford. Is there a second?
Second.
I think Jason won the second contest.
I just want to have a bit of discussion first.
You want to discuss?
Yeah, before we vote. You
Okay,
can
go
have
ahead.
discussion. I just wanted to comment that I'm obviously not particularly happy about the open-ended tent addition without any restrictions on it. So my vote may appear harsh, but it's only because of that. My discussion.
Okay, thanks. I'll do a roll call vote. Berger?
No.
Thanks. Blanchard, yes. Donahue?
Yes.
Montleone?
Yes.
Reiki?
Yes.
Yankee?
Yes.
Hamlin?
You have to unmute, Lynn.
– Yes.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. The next application, just kidding, Ford. Next item on our agenda tonight is persons wishing to address the board on non-agenda items. Would anybody wish to address the board? I guess I'll encourage, are there any members of the public now?
And we still have one on, but there's no hands up.
Okay. I encourage board members that if you have questions as you're reviewing the applications about the ordinances that we're working with, or questions about the particular applications, reach out to Caroline and talk through some of this with her. I think that'll help save us a lot of time in the room, trying to weed through some of the intricacies of why these are before us, and it's sometimes helpful just to have that conversation with Caroline. She loves hearing from us during non-meeting times.
As long as it's not specific detail in the application, if it's procedural or ordinance related, but you can ask me anything, and if I don't feel like I can answer it, I'll tell you to ask in the boardroom. And sometimes they're really good questions. Like I know when Jim first joined, he asked some great questions. Like some of the ordinance or the comp plan, I was like, wow, that's great. It's helpful, and sometimes it sparks new information that we can give you guys to do your job better. So
Yep.
always bring the questions. I think we got some good questions tonight under the shoreline stabilization. I think I can try to get some clarity before the
Good
next
and
meeting
difficult
to
questions,
help us.
which if we have the opportunity for Caroline to sort of figure out the answers and then present that to us during the meeting, it helps sort of resolve some of the issues. So just think about that moving forward. I think that's going to be helpful for everybody.
You don't like 9 o'clock end time?
I'm in bed an hour ago. Yeah, Todd, do you have something to say?
Are we ready?
Any other comments? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, thank you, Todd. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Roll call vote. Berger?
Yes.
Blanchard, yes. Donahue?
Yes.
Montleone?
Yes.
Reiki? Yankee?
Yes.
Hamlin?
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night,
everybody.
Adjourn.
Recording stopped.
Good questions.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.